Hello and welcome to this, our 213th live stream, exploring the sewer world. If you don't get the reference here, our last Monday video was called Exploring the Spirit World, where we talked about the primordial gods. If you haven't seen that video, please go back and watch it after this is over. And I noticed here I have not configured my camera. Isn't that? That's the sort of day we're having today. We just had to deal with a troll on Discord, which was not fun. Okay. Oops, there we go. Go dark. Go light again. Okay. And then... oops, wrong way. Alright, there we go. Everything else set up. yeah, we had to deal with the troll like 3 minutes before the live stream started. So, yeah, they're not fun. Not fun at all. Okay, so anyway, we want to thank you all for joining our live stream today. And we're glad you could make it and be with us. We're just going to get right into the rules here and get into the questions. Okay? So, yeah, don't feed the gremlins after midnight. Absolutely. Okay, so the rules of the live stream are super chats have priority. That's true of any live stream on YouTube. It doesn't guarantee, a super chat will not guarantee we take your question, but it guarantees we see your question. Okay? Second is, we do take non-super chats, but we ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of it. If that's not there, we don't see it. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Your non-super chat questions, only post them once. All right? If you question spam, we will disqualify your question for the night. If you have making a reference to something in the Bible, please give us some context. So we need the book it's from, the chapter, and the verse. That just helps us to narrow things down. We also allow sponsored non-super chats. So if you're sponsoring a non-super chat, please include the text of the question in your super chat so we don't have to hunt for it. That just saves us a lot of time. And then finally, one question per chat. So we want to avoid the whole sort of question stacking that sometimes has been used in some of these super chats. So those are the rules. We hope we have a great time tonight, and we're going to get right to the questions here. Okay. Our first question of the night is going to be from Darkblade. Woohoo! And his question is, as someone familiar with both Egyptian and Semitic languages, do you support the theory that they have a common ancestor, nowadays known as Proto-Afroasiatic? I don't see anything really problematic with that theory. So, I mean, I hold to it because, if nothing, it's a linguistic classification, if nothing else. There does seem to be some relationship between Egyptian and Semitic languages. So, the idea that it came from one root language called Proto-Afro-Semitic is also not that big a leap either. So, I support the theory, but it's like, if another theory came along that was better, I wouldn't have any problem abandoning that either. But overall, I think the evidence is pretty good that there's a common root language to both. So I hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, we got a second non-super chat here from Joseph. What does the word ark mean? Okay. Now, we're talking here about just the term in English, ark. Okay. Now, the term ark in English can refer to one of two things. It can refer to a boat, It can also refer to a vessel that's used to protect something, okay? And it can be used both ways. Okay, there's no question that it is often used in both ways. Now, when it comes to the term ark in the Bible, the Hebrew term, you got two words, okay? You got Noah's Ark, which is a teba, and then you've got the Ark of the Covenant, which is an aron. And those are kind of different in what they mean, okay? Now, ironically, neither one of those terms in Hebrew means a boat, okay? Now, we sometimes translate that in its contextual meaning as a boat, but it doesn't really mean that. In the case of Noah's Ark, that teba, a teba is a box, it's a chest. So it really should be translated Noah's chest, not Noah's boat or ark. Okay? So in that case, it's when we translate it ark in that sense, it's in that boat meaning as well as in that nuance of being a protective vessel. Okay? Now, in the case of an aron, which is the Ark of the Covenant, that particular aron means a coffin, a chest, or a coffer. And probably coffer or coffin is probably the closest meaning to aron. Okay? So that's the meaning of the word ark, both its translation into English and its meaning in the various usages of teba and aron in the Old Testament. Okay? And interestingly enough, aron appears to be a Semitic word, but teba comes from an Egyptian word. So very, very interesting little linguistic note there. All right? So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. I will also take these from Mike JSB as well. He's got here a couple questions on the conquest, but I'll take one or two of them here. Mike JSB asks, some early daters claim that the Middle Bronze 3 houses found by the German excavators built up against the outer wall of Jericho City 4 on the north part of the tell supports the Rahab narrative. Any thoughts? Yes, I have some thoughts on this. And the thoughts come from Joshua 2:15. Pull our Bible up here. Joshua 2:15. And here, I need the other one. All right, Joshua 2:15. And this is the part of the narrative where the spies come and visit Rahab, the harlot, in her inn, and she hides them, and then she has to release them. Okay, verse 15. It says, she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was. Now the text here in the translation says on the city wall. It's not what the text says. It was in the city wall. So she was living in the wall. This was called a clarification by reduplication. Okay? So here's the issue. You could read this without that reduplication. You could read this as her house was inside the wall, like it was protected by the wall. But reduplication is done to narrow down nuance. And this is one of the ways Hebrew compensates for its broad lexical range. Okay? Now, the text nowhere here says it's on the wall or outside of the wall. The problem with the Middle Bronze 3 houses is they're located against the outer wall outside of the city. That's the problem with them. Okay? So the problem is, Mike JSB asks the follow-up, why do some translations read on the wall? Because they cannot, because here's the thing. Translators aren't archaeologists. they don't understand the whole thing about casemate walls. Okay? Now, a casemate wall is where you've got two walls. You've got two walls with some fill inside. Well, people back then would used to take that fill out and make homes inside the two walls. So they were actually living in the walls. Okay? And you could make some pretty neat apartments like this, you know, and they would build upwards. You had a view, yeah, excellent view. Yeah. So this is what the text in Joshua 2:15 here is expressing, is a residence inside of a casemate wall. So the text nowhere in here actually says on the city wall, but it does says in the city wall, and the reduplication of the text indicates that it's an emphasis by duplication. So the author here is really stressing that it is inside the walls. Ryan Comcab asked the follow-up question: how high would the window be that the spies rappel down? Well, if she's living inside the walls itself, probably about 20 feet. I don't understand Darkblade's question there. I'll read it, but I don't understand what he's asking. Would it be cheaper for a certain wall fan to build a casemate wall or a normal wall on his country's border with its southern neighbor? I don't understand the question. Sorry. I know you're trying to follow up this, but I just don't understand what you're asking here. Oh, is it? Oh, it's a Trump question. It's a political question. Yeah, we won't take that. You should ask him. He's making a joke. Yeah, okay. I had to have that explained to me. Fair enough. I do archaeology, not politics, okay? Politics, not my thing. Okay, so that should bring clarity at least to the question here of whether these Middle Bronze 3 houses could be of that nature. Okay, and I don't think, given the text that we have in Joshua chapter 2, that this is a convincing explanation. All right, so I hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Very much appreciated. Mike JSB asks, will you ever do a video discussing the Middle Bronze 2 and Late Bronze 1 phases of Hot Sore, based on Bakir's recent work, and how it's problematic for ultra-early and early-date conquest theories? I might someday. I haven't given it a lot of thought. We do have actually a fairly robust list at the moment of topics we do want to do. So we'll put it on our ideas list, and you know, we'll see what happens. Okay? All right, now we get to the super chats. The first super chat is one that did not go through last week, which we received the payment, but it didn't come in on our list. So we're going to take it this week. And if that ever happens to somebody, yeah, YouTube glitches sometimes. So when YouTube glitches, we'll go good for it. No problem. And this is from Travis Garrett, who gave us a $5 super chat last week. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, what were the grooming, shaving practices outside of Egypt in the ancient Near East? Men, women, hair, beard, body, etc. Was lice as bad outside of Egypt? Okay. The appearance seems to be that lice was not as big a problem in Egypt, or outside of Egypt. Outside of Egypt, men had full beards. Okay, most of the cultures of the Middle East had full beards. Everything from, say, the Israelites who had full beards, to, say, the Assyrians who had these like monster beards, these bushman beards, mountain man beards. Okay, there's nothing more magnificent than an Assyrian beard. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, they were better than the Viking beards by a long shot. Now, why was lice such a problem in Egypt? more so than in the rest of the Levant and in ancient Near East. The reason why was population density. Okay, uh, population density is happens when you get people who are packed together in such tight quarters that things like lice. Lice. Here's the thing about lice. Lice spreads where you've got people in tight quarters. You know, this is why you get lice outbreaks at like schools, cities, submarines, and Egypt. Okay, so anytime you have tight living conditions, and population density in Egypt was really, really high. Houses were very small, and people were packed together in tight communities. You go to Deir el Medina, and where you can see the workers' village, and they were houses on top of each other. They just were. It was crazy how small those houses were. Okay, so mysterious fungus. So like how plague spread? Yeah, similar. Yeah, similar. It's again a tight population density will allow a plague to spread in the same way that it'll allow lice to spread. Ryan Cohn can. They had submarines in Egypt. Did they have schools in Egypt? Yeah, they did. Jack Ray, houses on top of each other like apartments. They were multi-floor houses. Okay, so they had more than one living level on a house, but you have to understand that the housing that they had in Egypt was really, really had a small footprint. So a lot of times they built up. So houses of 2 and 3 floors were not uncommon in Egypt. Yeah, the walls were actually connected like townhouses. So people shared walls in Egypt. So yeah, it was a very tight living quarters, very tight living conditions, and that seems to have been true throughout Egypt. So it wasn't just Deir al Medina. We find similar situation at Lahoun as well. Ryan, they had to take it to the next level, I suppose so. Okay. All right, so I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. We really appreciate it. Okay, we can move on to the rest of the super chats here. Next one here is from Johan Snyman for 70 South African Rand. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. In Exodus 7:19 through 8 to 7, did the water return back to normal after just 7 days, or was it actually a longer time to allow frogs to be able to multiply enough by the time of the second plague? The text says that it was resolved after the 7 days, I believe. Let me just take a look at the text here. Exodus. Seven. I won't read through the whole thing here. But this is talking about the plague of blood, where the streams and the waters were all turned to blood. It says here at verse 25, and 7 days passed after the Lord had struck the Nile. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say, thus says the Lord, let my people go, they may serve me. And so that doesn't say that the water returned back to normal after 7 days. What it's basically saying is after 7 days, then you get the frogs. So we don't know how long exactly the plague of blood was. It might have been 7 days, it might have been longer. I'm not sure. Okay. Mysterious fungus. Back in my day, we shared the wall with the neighbors or lived inside them. That's cramped. Yeah. Darkblade, I do recall if this was in Shanghai. I don't recall if this was in Shanghai, Dalian, but I once saw a multi-family residence building upwards of 30 stories tall. Yeah, I believe it. You see buildings like that all over the place now today, but back then it was a little less common because of building standards. But people did build tall buildings. There were some that were like 5-6 stories easily. So it was, that's just something people did. But typically most residences were 2 or 3. Okay. Next one here is from AT Ministries. For $1.99. Thank you for the super chat. Thoughts on the Dead Sea Scrolls AI thing? Okay. We were thinking of doing a mana machine alert on this, but it turns out there isn't actually that much to say about this. Here's basically what they did. They took the consensus of scholars on various texts, did some carbon-14 tests on those texts, and then what they did was they used AI to analyze the handwriting samples and contextualize it with both the scholarly opinion and the AI. And not surprisingly, trained on that data, the AI sort of took a middle-of-the-road position between what the scholars thought and what the carbon-14 determined. Now, there's some issues here on all fronts. Okay? Now, one of the things is that the AI they used was for comparative epigraphy. So we don't have a huge number of samples to do that sort of comparative epigraphy. So the training of the AI is going to be spotty. Okay. The other thing is that there are still some issues with the carbon-14 itself. Now, I think that carbon-14 is a tool. I think it's a useful tool. I think you can't depend on it entirely. But I think the same thing about AI too. It's a tool. It's a useful tool, but you can't rely on it entirely either. So, I think one of the things I have concerns when I had about what the scholars said was I think some of the scholars overstated some of their claims. I think the most egregious overstatement they made was where they called the Dead Sea Scrolls authors. They attributed them to as having written the Bible. They didn't write the Bible. They were copyists. Okay? And I think the research team took their conclusions too far. This was something that Christopher Rolston had commented on, that this could be a very useful tool, but that the researchers themselves overstated the conclusions of the tool. Yeah.
The AI was told.
Yeah.
Didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. My producer also said here that they also fed the answers to the AI. So it's not like the AI is coming up with this independently. It's using both the carbon-14 results and the scholarly opinion to inform its opinion. It would have been a lot more powerful result if they had some sort of third-party basis to generate its opinion. So I think that's an issue there as far as the reliability of that tool, as far as its seed data goes.
With the result, we like the result. It, the lifetime of it. So it's, are you really hard giving you?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So I think there are some issues here about what it the basis that the AI is working upon. Ryan Camp asks, so what did the AI actually do? Okay, here's what it actually did. It took the dating from the carbon-14, and it took the scholarly opinion. Now, the researchers already knew that the scholarly opinion is the late date, the carbon-14 is the early date. Okay, so they had that range of dates already. And then what they did was they took the AI and said, okay, look at the epigraphy here and compare it to other Hebrew, first century Hebrew epigraphy. Okay. And from that, come up with a date based upon the range you were given. So it was already going to get a result that's, we could guess, was going to be in that middle range. Because that was the confines of what it was expected to do. Darkblade says, wait, did they actually say they wrote the Bible? Yes. Yes, they did. I thought the DSS status as copy was DSS 101, Dead Sea Scrolls 101. Yes, it is Dead Sea Scrolls 101. The thing you at least know if you're going to know anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah. Yeah. Again, this is a, how do I say this? This
I don't know. Mama said.
Mama says, I knew it by the time I was 12. Morons. Well, they're computer scientists. These guys are computer scientists. These guys who basically are specialists in the digital digital humanities. Okay, so the team that did this were not Dead Sea Scroll experts. Far from it. They were a team of technologists. So they're already they don't know anything about the Bible or its formation. Jonathan Walker says they didn't give the AI enough to form an outcome independent of the dating and consensus. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. And my producer has even said that too, that they just they didn't give the AI enough. Mysterious Fungus. Wait, so did they conclude that the Dead Sea Scrolls authors wrote the Bible because of their study, or did they assume that from the beginning? It seems to be that they concluded that from their study. Okay, that's what it appears. But again, is this an overstatement or just ignorance of what the Dead Sea Scrolls actually were? Don't know. Vaults. Hashtag blame Constantine. Could be. Yeah. So, the problem with the study was not sort of its method, although there was definitely methodological problems with it. Its conclusions were definitely concerning. Not because it really shattered anything. I think one interesting conclusion that came out of it was an early date for Daniel. A really early date for Daniel. 3rd century early date for Daniel, which at this moment is sort of goes against the consensus. The consensus right now is that Daniel was written in the 2nd century. This would contest that claim. So, I don't think this study should be thrown out completely, just because the the researchers um, overstated their conclusions. I think though that their AI modeling does need some improvements on its training data. Okay, if it has a larger set of training data, yeah, this could be used effectively for this kind of work. It's not the first time this has been done. Okay, either we need to keep that in mind too. Um, Comparative linguistics has been, and particularly comparative orthography, has been done by other computer programs too. So the method has merit. The method has merit. It just needs refinement. Darkblade, 3rd century, still a lot closer to what the seculars say than to what the Judeo-Christian tradition says. Yes, but here's the problem. Once you get into that 3rd century and you get into that whole sort of reasoning why the secularists late dated, which is because of the idea that, prophecy isn't real. Okay? I mean, that's what the secularists are going to say here. Well, it has to be late because they are predicting that Daniel is predicting the Seleucid Ptolemy wars of the 2nd century. So it has to be written in the 2nd century. Well, if this dates to the 3rd century, then this isn't that sort of. This isn't. You got to give that prophecy some merit then. So, Mysterious Fungus says basically, if you allow one prophecy to be real, then you open the floodgates. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's why there's such a push to date Daniel to the 2nd century. Now, what's very interesting is we already have some evidence that suggests that Daniel is a lot older than that. For example, almost all the scholars agree that the 1st Enoch dates to the 4th century. Okay, almost everyone agrees with that. And 1st Enoch quotes Daniel. So there's already basis, there's already some grounds to suggest that Daniel is a lot older than the scholarly consensus suggests. So, Ryan Comcam asks, "What is your take on the dating of the Book of Daniel?" I think it's an earlier book. I don't hold a scholarly consensus here. I think there's enough warrant right now to say it's at least 5th century BC. Okay, so I think I would put it in around the 5th century BC. I don't think it matters that much if it isn't, but I also think that 5th century dating of Daniel is not unreasonable based upon the quotation from 1st Enoch. Okay, so so that's what I would generally hold to. I Whether or not it's 6th century, I don't know, but I would put it at 5th. All right, so that's my thoughts on the dating of the Book of Daniel. All right. All right, let's get back to the super chats here. Next super chat here is from AT Ministries for $1.99. Thank you for the super chat. What do you like about the Dune series? I like that it feels alien, but yet there's aspects of it that are sort of familiar, like the desert. I mean, I love books set in the desert. Always have. Okay. I like its take on what future religion could be like. I think it's very interesting. Um, I think its idea of cult figures as a danger is very provocative. There's a lot of things I like about the Dune series. It's got this idea of the future and what mankind is like without artificial intelligence. Very, very interesting, thought-provoking series. It's a great read too. It's just a great read. I didn't like all Herbert's books. Okay, I think some of his books were pretty badly written. I think like the White Plague was horribly written. Um, some of his books were just not good, and I'll be straight up for that. I think it's one of those things where Herbert's books, Dune was really the best of his series, the best of his books, and I think I very few of his books outside of Dune I thought were any good, and that's because of it. A large part of it is his style of writing. Um, can be very obtuse at times, and not obtuse in a good way, but more that the writing was kind of muddy and you couldn't really follow what was going on. But at least with Dune, you had a good sense of where everything was going. In fact, that was part of what made it such a good series, was that it was constructed in such a way that all the building pieces that were put together so that one just fell after the other like dominoes. He didn't always do that with his books, which is unfortunate. Mysterious Fungus says Tolkien didn't like Dune. I don't always like Tolkien either. Um, there are some things some ways I think Tolkien is an overrated storyteller too. Okay, I know that's going to be heresy. I know that's going to be pitchforks and torches as soon as I said that. I think some of Tolkien's writing was really overrated. Like the 50-page Council of Elrond. Oh boy. That's what I love. We all love is 50 pages of business meetings. Fantastic. Oh, we all love meetings at the best of times. Yeah, as my producer said, you read a novel to escape reality, only to be stuck in another board meeting. Perfect. Fantastic. Good times. Good times. Well, another thing, I mean, the ending too is just insufferably long on the Lord of the Rings, where he for like 50 pages says goodbyes. You know, half of half of half of it was you know, going from town to town saying goodbye to everyone. You didn't need that to be eased out of the story. 10 pages, 20 pages would have sufficed. 50? Really? and then the you had all of those appendixes at the end. Like you had the Elvish dictionary and the genealogies of the dwarves. And it's like, who needs all of this? Like, really? You'll see. Dude, I needed that to get through the Silmarillion. Yeah, Silmarillion had some of those same problems too. um yeah, I haven't. Yeah, so I mean I'm for all the shade Tolkien places on Dune, at least Herbert could tell a cohesive story and then know when to stop. Learning to stop writing is an art as well. As Lewis Carroll puts it in when the Queen of Hearts asks Alice, or I think maybe it was the King of Hearts, when she's asked to relate the tale, she says, start at the beginning, continue through the middle, say the end, then stop. No, I think that's the King of Hearts. Yes, there is a King of Hearts. There is a King of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland. He doesn't get as much attention as the Queen of Hearts. Oh no, I don't think so. Yeah, Rob Laird says, knowing when to stop is a good talent to have for sermons too. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, once you get your point across, you don't have to belabor it. Stop. Just stop. I mean, I've known some excellent preachers that had no conclusion at all. He just stopped. Dead. He's like, he's done. I'm done. Here's the sermon. I'm done. It's perfectly valid, yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it is we tend to belabor conclusions because almost all of us in the West are taught to write using the essay method. Where we have, you start with your introduction, you do 3 paragraphs with 1 point each, and then you do your conclusion. It's a really, really terrible way to learn writing. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, but a lot of times it's better just to get to your point and then stop. Now, for most say literary works of fiction, you do want to decompress your reader out of the story world. But that doesn't take much. 10 pages, 15 pages maybe. For a full-length novel, but Dossman, we need to write sermons like Tolkien. Long. Mama says, I will say this, I love poetry, but the poetry went on a little too long sometimes. Yep. Mysterious Fungus, how about the guy that has just an introduction and conclusion? You might want to flesh it a little more than that. Mama says it takes more than 1 sentence, though, Doc. I don't know. Sometimes you do want to leave them hanging. You sometimes do want to leave them hanging. That's not, if the story demands that you end on 1 sentence, then end on 1 sentence. But it depends what you want your audience to feel at the end. That's a literary effect too. And it's not just the cliffhanger to get a person to read the next book. It can be, you can do this as a literary effect just to keep people off balance or in anticipation of something else to come. I think it was the book of, it's either Book of Kings or Book of Chronicles that ends this way too. Okay? Where it just ends, it just stops. Because the audience knows that there's more coming. So, so there are times when you just want to end a story just because you want to leave them with a certain impression and feeling. So, yeah, Ryan Concab says Chronicles ends mid-sentence. Yeah, just ends in the middle of it. Yep, just in the middle. Yeah, that's how Chronicles ends. So this is an important effect that you want to have sometimes in your writing, and you can do this in fiction as well. It's very, very effective when done right. It can come off cheesy if you do it too often or if you do it gratuitously. But Ryan Coquette, you missed my joke. No, I got the joke. It just wasn't that funny. but here's the thing. You can it is one of those things where just sometimes you stop. Darkblade, maybe the author just died before he could finish. That has happened, yeah. That's happened. Serious fungus, not like end abruptly, but it does seem weirdly rushed. Well, sometimes you want to make them feel that way, though. If it feels rushed, and that's where you're going with this, you know, sometimes you want them to still feel like they're gasping for air at the end of it, you know, and that's if you want to make it, your audience feel, your reader feel that way, then that's a good approach. Monty Python. Oh, they did it because they ran out of material. Yikes. Yeah. Ugh. Yeah, the Monty Python endings were famous for just stopping because they ran out of things to say. Yeah, that's not a good ending. That's not a good ending. But they got away with it. Yeah, they got away with it. All right, let's move on to the super chats here. Next one here is from AT Ministries for $1.99. Thank you for the super chat. He asks, thoughts on non-institutional churches? I think you mean non-denominational, but unless you do mean something else by this. I have no problems with them. I think just like institutional churches, you can have good ones and bad ones. But I don't have any problem with them per se. Okay. Like all churches, check out their doctrinal statement and the theology. Check out what the culture of the church is like, and you know, make sure you're not getting into anything strange. Okay. But a non-institutional church, a non-denominational church is just fine, as far as I'm concerned. The next one here is from AT Ministries for $1.99. Issues with the two Babylons. What do you mean? I'm not sure what you mean here by the two Babylons. I mean, talking about the original Babylon versus, say, the eschatological Babylon. Is that what you mean here? I'm trying to figure out what you mean here. So, oh, that's a book by Alexander Hislop. I haven't read it. Generally, I do not think anything Alexander Hislop is very good. Okay. But if he's talking about the Alexander Hislop book, I wouldn't recommend it. Almost everything Hislop has done has been slop. But I haven't read the two Babylons, so I can't say. All right. Yeah, the author doesn't have a good track record. Yeah. I mean, you just come into some authors that even if you don't read everything they wrote, you can pretty much guess it's not going to be a good book, you know, just because of the track record. Yeah, it's in the name. Well, mysterious function, because I can see one issue that's too many Babylons. Ryan doesn't end abruptly. Could be. Barman, Stephen King. Maybe. Maybe. Oh boy. So no, I again, if they got a bad track record, the chances of them producing a good book is going to be really small. A good book, I mean like reliable. So for example, I'd place Hislop in that category. Um, I would place who else would I place in? David Roll I'd put in that category. Um, um, uh, Vilkovsky would be in that category too. Yeah, so there's a lot of writers that they have a track record of producing rubbish. So if they got a track record of producing rubbish, yeah, you can't rely on any book being very good. Count of Mercy, Chuck Missler. Yeah, I put Chuck Missler in that category too. Okay, so that's the best as I can talk about this. Next super chat here is from AT Ministries for $1.99. Thank you for the super chat. Did the Israelites know of Yahweh at Avaris? Probably not. Okay, probably not. The evidence we have from Avaris is that they worshipped Egyptian gods, but they also worshipped some Canaanite gods, particularly Baal, Resheph, and Astarte. There's no evidence of any of them ever worshipping Yahweh at Avaris. It seems more like that Moses brought Yahweh worship from Midian to the Israelites who were living there, and then they sort of moved out and then started worshiping once they were in their wandering in the wilderness. That's where they started to worship Yahweh. Das, Darkblade, Roger and Perlman. Yeah, he's a miss. Yeah, he's a miss. Mama, L. Ron Hubbard. Yeah, he's a miss too, but he's a miss for a variety of reasons. His religious books read like science fiction, and his science fictions read not great. I consider L. Ron Hubbard to be a failed science fiction writer who made it big in religion. Okay. Yeah, he was. He built himself a compound. What I think is so funny is the Church of Scientology had declared him dead had insisted he was alive, living in his desert compound. Until the IRS said, okay, he hasn't filed taxes in 10 years. The IRS started knocking on the Church of Scientology's doors and says, hey, this guy's alive. Why hasn't he paid his taxes? And suddenly he was dead. Amazing. What was this? Whoops. He's now just alive in spirit. He's passed on to the Thetans. Yeah, that was really something else. Nice. Ryan says he's only mostly dead. He's dead enough for tax purposes. Ryan says, I work a block from his compound, can see it every day. Oh boy. Dossman says, after he died, did the writing improve? Surprisingly, yes. Funny that. They were still publishing books in his name after he died, and they were actually better. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he was a much better writer in death than in life. Dossman goes, that's amazing. Laugh out loud. Mama, he was a ghostwriter. Woo. Yeah, his books actually improved dramatically. But we found that a lot happened, where people continue to write after death in just some amazing ways. What's it now? Uh, Something with flowers in the attic. That was called.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The writing.
Yeah, the writing didn't improve that one, but wow, amazing how she continued to churn out books long after her death.
Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah. Truly posthumous. Well, I mean, Hubbard was such a horrible writer in life. Um, he was from that era of just in that transition between Golden Age and Silver Age science fiction, where the quality of one's writing didn't matter so much. So a lot of those classic Golden Age science fiction books were really badly written. Really badly written. Like E. E. Doc Smith of the Lensman series. Terribly written works. I mean, atrociously written. But the guy published 100 of those pulp novels. He's considered one to be one of the Golden Age science fiction. Mama says, nothing should improve that story. Flowers in the Attic is just the worst. It's like small-scale modern Game of Thrones. Well, that's one way of putting it. Count of Marcy says, that Travolta movie about Scientology was one of the worst movies ever. Oh yeah, Battlefield Earth. I actually had the hardcover at one point to Battlefield Earth. That was long and tedious. It was something like 800 pages, 800,000 pages. I mean, it was really a long book. Really a long book. And it was so tedious to read. I think I ultimately DNF'd it around 40-50% in. It was just, ugh. Okay, so let's move on to the next one here. 18 ministers for 199. Thank you for the super chat. Why isn't icon veneration efficacious? Okay. Because it's based upon a false premise of a false idea of prayer. Okay. So, again, and not an unbiblical view, but an abiblical view of prayer. Okay. Now, the whole idea of icon veneration is that you are getting the saints who are alive in Christ. Okay, no issue there. To pray for you. Okay. But the whole idea of prayer is only a small fraction of prayer is actually requesting something on your behalf. Okay? That is like the smallest minutia, or I should say the most impoverished definition of prayer, is asking for stuff. So the whole idea of contacting the deceased saints to ask for stuff on your behalf, ask for favorable results on your behalf, is kind of an impoverished view of what prayer really does. The bigger view of prayer is more to get your view in line with God's. The dead in Christ don't need that already. They don't need to pray in that way. Their views are already in alignment with God's. Okay? So then, when we're told to pray by Christ, we're told to pray directly to the Father. When the apostles say, teach us to pray, and Christ says to them, pray like this: Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Okay? It is one of those things where you don't need to go through the saints to have them pray for you to go to the Father. You go to the Father directly. So it's not that icon veneration is unbiblical, it does, though, leave an open question as to whether or not it's efficacious. That's a different matter. Okay? Now, I understand the reasoning of, say, the Seventh Council, or the Second Council of Nicaea here, where for them, icon veneration is a whole is tied up with to the issue of incarnation. So for the Second Council of Nicaea, they saw icons as being proof or the evidence of incarnation. So if you deny icons, you deny the power of the icons, you deny the power of the incarnation. And that's a false equivalency. Okay, I think that the Second Council of Nicaea here made a logical error. Okay, so, but I understand their reasoning. I just think that reasoning is incorrect. Okay, but but even if we say it's not an unbiblical practice and give it allowance as an accretion that is formed after, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with accretions. Accretions do happen within religions and are still viable practices. It's one of those things that Barclay says, so on the pro-intercession view, the saints are a bit like telephone operators for our prayers. Is that right? Yeah, they're a bit like that. That's not a bad approach. But they're also getting on the line, and they're not just directing your prayer. They're repeating your prayer. They're saying your prayer. They're making requests on behalf of you. Think of them kind of like this. It's like dial a friend. Dial a friend. And so let's say you want to get some a favorable result for a job. You call the friend of the boss. You call the boss's friend. Well, we'll call the boss. You call the secretary, who happens. You chat up the secretary and say, "Hey, can you put in the good word with me with the boss?" And then the boss gives you a favorable decision based upon his friends and his secretary. It's not what you know; it's who you know. Yeah. EuroC says, as Eastern Orthodox, let me clarify that one really only supposed to pray for salvation, not stuff. That's going to depend upon your view of Eastern Orthodoxy. One should not pray to the saints or God for stuff, but for aid in our repentance and drawing close to Christ. In some ways that's true. In other ways, it goes beyond that as well. I've seen so many Eastern Orthodox pray through the saints for, say, the health of the monarch. I've seen that happen. Okay, that's praying for stuff in a way, or a result. So it's not just necessarily stuff, but it is results. Okay, it is an expectation that through the prayer that the world will be changed. So I think here what we got. And I said there's a diversity of opinion here to what Eastern Orthodoxy believes anyway. And frankly, too, Eastern Orthodoxy aren't the only ones who venerate icons. Roman Catholics do too. Okay? And the Apostolic Communion also venerates icons. So there are other views of this as well. All right. So, I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right. What?
God save the
Dark Plague, God Save the King via St. Luke. Yeah.
And messianic atonement unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah, Messianic Atonement is right here. It's unnecessary. Pray directly to God. Yeah, here's what I would say. Summarize. I would. This is why I question whether or not veneration of the icons is efficacious. Okay, because it is unnecessary. You don't need to do it. So because you don't need to do it, it's just one of those things where just go directly to the source. AJ Higgins, composer, says the super chats seem to be glitching for me at $2. Can't purchase. Should I try for a different amount? I would try a different payment method. Honestly, it's when you get glitching like that. $500. Yeah.
Try $3.
Try $3.
If you'd like to, we really appreciate that. Also check your.
Yeah, that's really important. Mama has it probably right what's going on here. Mama says check your words count. Yeah. Here's the thing. Different super chats allow different word lengths. Okay? So, if for the shorter super chats like the $2 ones, it's a really short question. Okay? So if your word count's too long, it will glitch out. In which case, if you want more words, you have to spend more. Words aren't cheap. He says, it's below the word count. Also, that's money I might not have. Yeah, you know what? Just don't worry about it, man. It's, but again, check your payment methods. That would be probably my. See if it's something like if it's like a if it's an issue with the payment processing. That's happened to people here. Okay. 18 Ministries here for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. What do I tell people who say Cain and Abel is about faith versus works righteousness? Not a great reading of the text. I mean, that's an interpretation, and I think that's an eisegetical reading of the text where you're taking, and I'm not against this sort of idea of, say, works versus faith righteousness. It was really a popularized theology during the Reformation, and I'm not against that per se, but I think one issue is that that the Cain and Abel story really isn't about works versus faith. It's really more about grudging sacrifice, okay? And it just happens to include one as a blood sacrifice, one as a vegetable sacrifice. Now, is there anything inherently wrong with offering vegetables? The answer is no. The answer is no. Because vegetables were part of the temple rituals, offerings that were accepted. Farmer did vegetables, he could give his vegetables as offerings to the temple. No problem. There's never been a problem with that. It is a problem if you want to do certain kinds of offerings, but that's not really what's being talked about in the text. So, there's grain offerings. The temple has grain offerings. Like it or not, it's there. Those are vegetable offerings as such. What it seems to be more is that Abel was giving with a glad heart, whereas Cain was not. He was begrudgingly giving it. So, Tossman, I've heard it claimed that it was because God only liked meat. Laugh out loud. Yeah, I know. I know, and it's such terrible reasoning because God likes grain offerings. Apparently, he likes bread. He liked wine offerings. He likes wine. Okay. Mama says Cain and Abel was just righteous versus unrighteousness. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's as simple as that. That Abel was sacrificing with a glad heart, and Cain was sacrificing with a begrudging heart. And because he was begrudging of the offering, it wasn't accepted. Danny Dement. God would love Olive Garden. Hey, I like Olive Garden. Yeah. I would do Olive Garden any day. I mean, Olive Garden's great. I like Olive Garden. Okay. So let's go and move on to the next one here. Rob Laird, that can't be right. I can't believe in a God who only accepts meat well done. Jonathan Walker. Cain didn't put love into his offering. He was like, you want an offering? Here you go. Yeah, that was it. That's it in a nutshell. I mean, anything else that we add to this text is eisegesis. I think that's the problem with that reading is it's an eisegetical reading. There's no warrant from the text to say this is about works versus faith righteousness. Other than that some works are just works without love. All right, next statement. Next super chat here from 18 Ministries for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Aside from the Horus bird, what other ancient Near Eastern motifs demonstrate a bird descending upon someone to denote kingship? You don't see that a lot in ancient Near Eastern motifs. You don't see it in Assyrian as such, Mesopotamian motifs. You don't even see it in Levantine stuff for the most part. You do see one other instance of it, though, in Egyptian, where not so much to denote kingship, but Montu. Montu. Montu was a god of war, and he would descend upon the king to give him the victory. We see this in the Kaddish inscriptions, where Ramses II is fighting the Hittites, and Montu descends upon him. Well, he's a falcon. Okay, Montu is a falcon, like the horse bird, but he's not Horus. He's his own deity, and he's a god of war. So that's the other interest that I thought of when I read this was, yeah, you got other instances of these bird-like motifs also descending upon the king, but it tends to be generally of Egyptian origin. So, hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Dossman for $2. He says, my bell peppers are still alive. Awesome! I heard something very interesting about bell peppers recently. Is they do a lot better when they're grown in groups. They're one of the few plants that actually do better when grown in a cluster of like plants. So, if you have bell peppers, you have to sort of keep them with other bell peppers. If you do habaneros, you have to keep them with other habaneros. They don't like to be mixed with other different types of peppers. So if you grow jalapenos, you're best to put multiple jalapenos in the same pot. Very interesting. It's very, very interesting. And he said that's what he did. Yeah, you did. That's exactly apparently what you should be doing with them. So you don't thin them out. You don't thin them out like other plants. So it's sort of the opposite of what they're Mama says it probably has to do with cross-pollination. Actually, it doesn't. They've discovered that what happens is peppers form a bacterial community. They form a bacterial community under the soil, and that bacterial community basically makes the soil just right for growing peppers, and sort of kills off other types of plants. So in the case of, say, peppers specifically, the more you sort of cluster them together of the same type, the better they grow. And it's really weird. It's really weird. It's not like other plants in this respect. Other plants love space. Other plants want space because they're competing for nutrients. But what peppers do is they are more of a collaborative plant that sort of depends upon each other for survival. There also might be some shading aspect to this as well, where having multiple plants clustered together also provides some shade for them, because they're typically desert plants. So, Mama says, wow, cool. Yeah, it is really cool. I heard this from a soil biologist. So yeah, that was very interesting to find out. Jonathan, peppers aren't selfish. Ryan, crabs are shellfish. Bum. All right, that was fun. So I'm glad your peppers are still doing well. I haven't grown peppers this year. I haven't been able to get seed. Getting pepper seed here is really hard. I just would I love peppers. I love growing peppers. I love having them. But I do need to. I am thinking about going and getting some pepper seed of some kind and growing another pot of them. My last one didn't do so well. Again, I think it was probably because I had it as a single plant. It probably would have been better off if I'd had clustered them, but I didn't know that at the time. So. Robert Laird, no intelligent design there. Okay. Let's move on here to the next one. Ooh, nice. Dossman says, in Southern California, I had a jalapeno bush that lived for 6 years. That's not surprising in Southern California. I like jalapenos. I like all sorts of peppers. Foodie section. I used to work at Western Greenhouse Growers, which was a packing plant for peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers, and I learned all about peppers. And oh my gosh, I love peppers. Peppers are so cool, so cool. They're interesting plants. They're delicious to eat. You can prepare them in many ways. They're just really, really interesting. Dossman, I know I missed that part of California. Yeah, well, that's something I miss too about California. It's about the only thing I miss of California. Well, that's true. Yeah, my producer says all the things she loved about California doesn't exist anymore. Okay. Um, Joseph asks, "Have you tried the fish sauce yet?" Yes, I have. I've used it in cooking. Um, but yep, it was sour. Yeah, tried it. I don't use it as a condiment though, like garam. But it works great in cooking. Messianic Talmud. Are you sure you don't miss the hotel dock? The Hotel California, where you can check out but never leave? A Discord beep alert. I thought I had muted that. I did mute that. I don't know how you got a Discord beep. Oops. Maybe I did the wrong thing here. Yep. Did. I muted the wrong program. Okay. Yep. Yeah, Discord tends to beep sometimes. Okay, next super chat here is from Joseph for $2. Thank you for the super chat. Why do some people believe Job is the oldest book? The ghost Discord, yep. All right, why do people believe Job is the oldest book in the Bible? A few things. They believe it because it talks a lot about creation. Because some people misinterpret the chaos monsters found in the book of Job to be dinosaurs. Okay? This was a notion that was very, very common in early 20th century creationism. Okay? So that's why people generally thought that Job was the oldest book in the Bible, because it made references to these sort of ideas of creation and as I said, dinosaurs. Yeah, and I'm not buying the dinosaur thing. Okay, I'm just saying that right out. The second thing is, they do seem to ignore the whole Iron Age stuff that we find in Job, like the whole well, first of all, the use of iron. That's a dead giveaway right there. It's Iron Age, is the use of iron. The second thing is the ascendancy of the Aramean kingdom. So yeah, there you got that going on there. So Job versus the dinosaurs. Well, yeah, a lot of people are believing that. Yeah. So I mean, there and to be honest, there's still people like Prager. Prager still repeats this idea that Job is the oldest book in the Bible. And it's been thoroughly debunked at this point. No real Bible scholar of any note, anyway, believes that Job is the oldest book of the Bible anymore. Most will assign it to probably Iron Age 2. Iron Age 2 into, say, the early Babylonian period is what most people will assign it to these days. Ryan Comcob asks, what do you think is the oldest book of the Bible? I think Exodus is. Okay. I would place Exodus as the oldest book in the Bible. And the reason why is that not so much that it's the whole book is the oldest, but that the fragments the sources that we have for Exodus are probably the oldest. That could be stuff like the Song of the Sea, the Ten Commandments, the early attestation of the Exodus route. All of that stuff attests to the early writing of the sources of the book of Exodus. Dossman, it all comes back to Exodus. Yeah, absolutely. You bet your bottom dollar it does.
Over and over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, as my producer just says, it says over and over and over again, hundreds of times in the Bible. For I am the Lord your God, that with a outstretched arm and a mighty hand I brought you out of the land of bondage of Egypt. Over and over and over again. Yes, it all comes back to Exodus. Here's what I think. Like, for example, Harry Stark just mentioned his name here. Ken Ham is young Earth. Yeah, this is the thing that Ken Ham gets wrong. Okay, and he gets this badly wrong. Ken Ham says it all goes back to creation. No, it's not. Here's the thing. Genesis is pointing forward to Exodus. Everything else is pointing back to Exodus. Genesis is the prologue. It's the lead up to Exodus.
Well, it makes sense.
Hmm.
And then everything.
But even that whole thing in the beginning, God created. That's describing temple ritual. Where's the temple ritual being used? It's being used in the tabernacle. That's Exodus. You know, the whole ritual of the flood is sacrifice and conversion, pointing again to the Exodus.
I don't know that. Historical training and
Yeah, yeah, it's all points back to Exodus. So, you know, Dossman isn't wrong here. He's actually dead on here. It all comes back to Exodus, because the Exodus is the defining event for Israel. Creation is not the defining event for Israel. Exodus is. So yeah, I mean, it's. I think when Ken Hamstar said it all goes back to creation, he's not right. He's definitely wrong. You know, even with all, say, Genesis stuff, Genesis is all pointing to Exodus. So Eros, I wonder if Dennis Prager was onto something by writing his Exodus commentary first. Oh, his Exodus commentary is so bad. So bad. we actually own a hard copy of that commentary. It's so bad. AJ Higgins says, but Ken Ham said Genesis was the foundation of the Bible. Yeah, well, ooh, I know, and he made that his sort of his foundational shtick for 50 years. You know, he made that his, but it's wrong. It's all wrong. You know? Yeah, it's really, I mean, everything points in the Old Testament is coming out of Exodus or pointing to Exodus. And even the crucifixion is pointing back to Exodus, pointing back to Passover. Yeah, Mama, answers in Genesis, all in the name. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thankful no one has done an answers in Exodus. That would be so cringe. But thank God no one has done answers in Exodus. It would be better, but it would be, oh no, 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 no. Ryan Cohenkamp says, uh, or is the Exodus pointing to the cross? Well, that's going to be a matter of perspective, temporally speaking. If we're just looking at is in sequential time, okay, Exodus comes first, so it might be pointing to the cross, but it's not doing that explicitly. The cross, however, refers to the Exodus. Okay, but this is also the way Christ puts it too. You know, look into the scriptures and see; you will find me there. Well, he's pointing back. So whether it's pointing one way or the other, that's just then a matter of perspective. Kiara. Yes, answers and numbers, the new channel name.
that was wrong.
Okay. It's like answers and numbers. Yeah. Jack Ray answers by numbers. Yeah. Yeah, this channel nobody will watch.
If you do it.
Oh, if I do it, maybe, but there'd have to be a lot more foodie sections for people to come watch answers in numbers. Yeah. So okay, so I think we've beaten this Job is the oldest book thing to death. Answers in cooking. Could be. Could be. Next super chat here is from Messianic Talmud. For $10, thank you for the super chat. He says, your thoughts on the interpretation by Peter van der Veen and Christopher Thies of the partial hieroglyphs on the Grand Slab name ring being Israel. I think it's awful. I actually addressed this in that marathon we did on early Exodus arguments. I think it's Van der Veen is terrible at this. I was actually last November, I was at a lecture by Van der Veen, okay, where he brings up these arguments again. And I challenged him directly, and they just cut off my mic. He will not defend his readings of this. He doesn't know enough about hieroglyphs to actually make this work. Okay? First of all, that inscription is really deep. It's about 5-6 inches deep. That indicates, first of all, that he's dated it wrong. He wants to say that it dates to Amenhotep II or Amenhotep III, but it really, if you have 6-inch deep inscriptions, you're really talking 19th dynasty here. So his dating on the inscription is completely wrong. Just right out of the gate. Right out of the gate, it's wrong. The second thing is that it doesn't read Yisrael. Okay? The text actually reads, according to him, it's Yah Sha'ir. Okay? So it's not Yisrael, it's Yah Sha'ir. But if you slur it together, like you've had 10 whiskeys, you could sort of hear Israel in that. The problem is going to be, though, that his interpretation of the hieroglyphs is impossible. It's absolutely impossible. You can't have it. He wants his cake and eat it too. Okay? Because he wants Yah to be Yah. But it can't be, even by his own rules. Okay? It has to either be a Y, or it has to be an Yah. But it can't be a Yah, because of the coalescing of the consonants. Okay? So it's an impossible thing. That the next, which is where he thinks it's Shah could be Shar, is chronologically incorrect for the time period he is suggesting that this took place. He's sort of taking a new a late Egyptian rule and sort of grafting that onto a Middle Egyptian context, and it's just so bad. It's just so bad. So I think there's no merit to his suggestions at all. None. In fact, a lot of Egyptologists have pretty much dismissed this. And not just guys like Hoffmeyer, but Rittner has as well. Rittner was really vehemently against this view. It just makes no sense linguistically. Makes no sense linguistically. It makes no sense archaeologically. And frankly, Van der Veen is not qualified even to make these claims. So, I hope that helped. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, next one here is from Messianic Talmud for $10. Thank you for the super chat. Which fits better the description as a land being a land of milk and honey? The Egyptian Nile civilization or the total land of Israel that was occupied by the 12 tribes? Flora, fauna, rainfalls. Okay, now we have to understand what the milk is and the honey is. If we understand that, we understand the rest of it. Okay? The milk mentioned is goat's milk. Okay, it's not cow's milk, it's goat's milk. Okay? The honey is wild honey. Well, that sort of limits your choice right there. Okay? The Nile River civilization was not a big fan of goats. Okay? Nile Valley civilization, especially by the time you get to the New Kingdom, had more or less become a cattle society. They ate mostly beef at that point. Beef and fish. Okay? Goats were... That was something Semites kept. Asiatics kept goats. Good Egyptians were not too much into goats or sheep. Okay? As far as honey goes, the honey that both honey was domesticated in both the Levant and in Egypt, but you didn't get a lot of wild honey in Egypt. It was one of those products that was cultivated and tended to just like any other agricultural product. In the Levant, there were places like Rehov, where Tel Rehov, where there was honey manufacturing being done, but you also had instances of wild honey still in Levant too. Matthew Harrell, the land of Cheerios. I suppose. Jack Ray, where is that? 946, huh? Yes. Jack Ray says, the land of milk and honeys. Yeah. AJ Higgins, did manna taste like frosted flakes? Could be. Could be.
No, otherwise they would not have complained about it.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't have complained half as much if it tasted like frosted flakes. They did say it tasted like honey. Okay? But like honey. Okay? So, given that this is these are the crops of a pastoral lifestyle, wild honey and goat milk, it's more talking here about it's a more apt description for Israel than it is for Egypt. Okay? So hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Mama, definitely how Samson saw it. I knew someone was going to bring up Samson here. Someone had to. Had to bring up Samson. You just had to go and bring up Samson, didn't you? Didn't you? Him and the wild honey in the lion rib cage. Ooh, ooh, oh. Dawson, man, Samson time. Yeah, well. Well, he definitely found some of that wild honey. A little too wild. Well, there's nothing. Dark Blade. It's Dr. Falk's fault for organizing a Samson hate cult. I just wish people would stop lionizing the guy. Ba-bum-bum.
Again, I'll take.
Yeah, that's it. My producer said it's that people don't, got what their view of Samson was from Sunday school and just don't go beyond it. All right, next one here. Followette of Ichthyus for $5. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, Dr. Falk, how do we understand Ezekiel 26:14 considering Tyre still exists today? All right, let's bring up the text and let's take a look here. Ezekiel. Ezekiel 26. And the whole thing is talking about Tyre here. Okay. And 14. Talking about the destruction of Tyre. And one of the interesting things about this passage here is it's not about the destruction of Tyre, it's about the destructions of Tyre. We go back to the beginning here. Let's start at verse 2. Son of man, because Tyre has said concerning Jerusalem, aha, the gateway of the peoples is broken, it has opened to me, I shall be filled, and now that she is laid waste, therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you, as the sea brings its waves. Okay, so this is not the destruction of Tyre, this is the destructions of Tyre. Okay? Verse 4. And they will destroy the walls and break down their towers, which happened. I will scrape her debris from her and make her a bare rock, which happened. She will be a place for spreading of nets in the midst of the sea, which happened. She'll be the spoil for the nations, which happened. Okay. So then let's and it happened historically that Tyre itself went not only through one destruction but many. Babylon had a shot at it. Okay, we know this actually happened because we got the tablets to show it. We also know that Greece, the Macedonians also conquered it. There was other conquests in there as well, but verse 14, and I will make you a bare rock, and you will be a place for the spreading of nets. You'll be built no more, for I, the Lord, have spoken, declares the Lord God. Okay, one of the things we need to understand about Tyre too is that it was a two-part city. Okay, it had a coastal area, but it also had an island region. Okay. And the island region was considered to be the seat of Tyre's power. Okay, one of the things that sort of made it hard to breach was its off coast portion of this. Okay, so as far as the king of Tyre goes, and Tyre doesn't exist anymore as a nation, so when it says, I will make you a bare rock and be a place of spreading nets, it's really kind of still talking about that island area there. You'll be built no more, for I, the Lord, have spoken. And Tyre as the city of the Tyre nation, we're not talking here Lebanon. Okay, we're talking Tyre. It's a different nation, different time, that sort of thing. So what we got here is a bit of what we would call military rhetoric, a hyperbole. So it's basically saying that Tyre is as a city of the kingdom of Tyre is going to be destroyed, and that the rest of it, as you're not going to be built no more. That's going to be hyperbole. You're never going to be raised as the great capital you once were. Yeah, it remained as a port city, and as a more or less a fishing village, but it never had the sort of the power of the capital city. As far as its capital, the capital would move on to Sidon. So Gandalf the Base says the identity of Tyre was destroyed and never recovered, which, if I remember right, was the common way of saying it back then. Yeah, pretty much.
Uh,
Yeah. Mama says it talks here about prestige here, and again, that's again what it's talking about here. It's laying the city low, not necessarily ruining it as a city never to be built upon again. It's more the idea that it would never be built up as the kingdom, as the capital city of the kingdom of Tyre ever again. Oh, jeez. You would bring up Los Angeles.
I'm from California.
Mysterious Fungus says, but Josh Bowen kept repeating the same thing without any charity. His argument is really weird. His argument is really weird. It's one of the weirdest arguments I've ever heard a biblical scholar use, which is that, he says that, well, the Bible says that it took 13 years to destroy Tyre, and, Nebuchadnezzar supposedly destroys it once, and then afterwards, every subsequent destruction of Tyre took less and less time, so it wasn't 13 years, therefore, Tyre was never destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, or by the Babylonians, and therefore, the Bible's wrong. And it's such a weird argument because, one, the Bible never says the Tyre took 13 years to destroy. That's from Josephus, okay, not from the Bible. So it's a strange argument. Second, the reason why it's such a strange argument is if a place is destroyed once, well, rebuilding is not always as successful as the original construction. So it's just the most bizarre, strange argument I've ever heard. It really doesn't make any sense. Yeah, Darkblade says it happened in a shorter time, therefore it didn't happen. That's his argument. Yeah. It's a weird argument. Really weird argument. Okay, moving on here. So, that's how to answer the Tyre situation. Next is from Jack Ray, who gifted the channel 10 Ancient Egypt and the Bible memberships. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. Really appreciate it. Okay. Darkblade sounds self-contradictory. It is, essentially. All right, next super chat here is from Follow It of Ichthys for $5. Thank you for the super chat. In your opinion, what is the best English words or words used to translate nakam in Genesis 6:6? Okay, let's pull up Genesis 6:6. Genesis 6:6. Okay. The text reads, and the Lord was sorry, nakam, that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Okay. The whole idea of nakam is not just to be sorry, but to console oneself. Okay? Regret. Yeah. Yeah, it's the regret thing. I mispronounced sorry. Nakam? think that's correct. I believe that's correct. Or maybe I just mispronounced sorry. Sorry. Do it like a Canadian. Sorry. Sorry. Oh boy. Yeah, so it's the idea of consoling yourself or having regret. Okay? And so it's not to be sorry as in apologizing. It's more to have regrets, second thoughts, to console yourself, that sort of thing. So Matthew A. Matthew Harrell, Canada accent. That's right, eh? Oh yeah, my dad had it really thick. My dad had a very thick. He had such a thick Canadian accent. He sounded like he was from Newfoundland. He wasn't. He was from Winnipeg. But so yeah, that's what I would translate that as regret, second thoughts, or to console oneself. All right. So I hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. All right, Jonathan Walker for $10. Thank you for the super chat. Relooking at the seal of Anash for its Egyptian symbolism, and I realized that the crown was also Egyptian, the Hem crown. How do critics ignore the large amount of influence that Egypt had on Israel? Oh, easy. Okay, how they overlook it. Egypt's hard. That's essentially it. There's a vast amount of stuff to know if you're going to start relating Egypt to the Bible. Okay, it's a very difficult field to wrap your head around. So what happens is when you get a lot of critics, especially Old Testament critics, they are Old Testament biblical studies is a secondary literature game. Okay? Egyptology tends to be a primary literature game. Now, what's the difference? Okay. With primary literature, you're dealing with the original sources. You're less concerned about what opinions people had about those sources. Okay? Because there's so much primary literature material out there that you're having to deal with stele and inscription and ostraca and papyri and your tens of thousands of sources. Okay, so you tend to in Egyptology focus more on the ancient texts themselves. Okay, in Old Testament studies, there's less of that. In Old Testament studies, it's less about the text, but who said what about the text. So, in many respects, Old Testament biblical studies is focused on consensus. It really is focused on consensus. In fact, they're so obsessed by consensus that unless somebody said it, it's very difficult to make a bold new claim regarding the text as such. So most biblical studies people will not look at, let me get Egyptian material. It's just too overwhelming for them. So there's just it's more beyond the scope of what they're doing, because again it's a secondary literature a study. So, and most of those Old Testament guys are not going to get into Egypt. It's too difficult. It's too dissimilar. So they think it has no influence, when it is highly influential, and there's a lot of influence on the Old Testament. But a lot of them too are much more comfortable with Assyriology than they are with Egyptology, in many respects, because the Assyriological material is is in many respects not that distant from biblical literature. You're both in both cases you're using a Semitic language. In both cases, the cultures tend to be very similar. Uh, when you're dealing with Egypt, you have to deal with a non-Semitic language. Yes, Egyptian comes out of Afro-Semitic, Proto-Afroasemitic, but the actual similarities between learning Egyptian and learning Hebrew are not very close. Okay, so that's why critics generally ignore it because they're trained to ignore it. You know, when you tell them about these similarities for the first time, they're shocked. They're absolutely shocked that that there are so many, that there's also so many parallels, and that there's so much influence. You know, and that's one of the things when I talked to my publisher about doing the Plagues of the Exodus book. You know, she was surprised that I was telling her all this stuff that she'd never heard of. She'd never heard of this. But again, it's because the Old Testament guys have a real difficult time getting into the material because of that secondary source bias. So Aaron Richards says, I'm still seeing Old Testament scholars not even dealing with ancient Near Eastern texts. They make it seem like Israel lived in a vacuum. Yeah, oh yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's exactly what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's exactly what's happening. They make it seem like the Bible is living in a vacuum.
And it's
oh yeah.
It's a American problem.
Yeah.
Because Europeans don't have that problem. Because you can't get away from the fact that
Mama, ooh, plague book tea. Well, you know, there is that issue. There is that issue though that we have to come to terms with, is that there is so much source material here that plays into the biblical narrative. And again, they're treating the Bible as if it's in this silo that has no interaction with anything outside of it. It's a crazy way of viewing the text. Yeah. Yeah. Jonathan Walker, the seal has Yahweh as a sun disk. Yep. 2 uraei on his sides. Yep. I have him a crown above him. Yep. Where the 2 horizontal lines are, 2 ram's horns. Uh-huh. Reed stalks in the middle, and 2 uraei at the side. Yep. Yep. Mama says, American Christians just don't get the interconnectedness. Oh, no. No, they don't understand things such as intertextuality. They don't get it. I think this is one of the problems we find, too, with, say, American scholarship as well. There's so little cross-fertilization between departments that I mean, I was very lucky. I was very lucky that I had a really broad cross-fertilization of a variety of different disciplines. That so I was in many ways protected from that insularity, because I'd taken courses on, you know, Hebrew, Greek, Egyptian, Akkadian. I had taken classes on Greek literature, philosophy, you know, all of this various different things on, say, you know, aspects of different religion all across it. Did some work on the early church fathers. You know, I had this broad base where I could go into various texts and look at the intertextuality of the Bible through these various lenses. So So, I was very fortunate in that my training didn't prepare me to be an insular scholar, but to really see the interconnectedness of this. Gandalf the Base said, I asked the new president of Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary about it this past week, about getting an Old Testament department restarted, and he actually didn't hate the idea. I'm shocked that they don't have one, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's shocking that a theological seminary doesn't have an Old Testament department. It really needs one. Um, so I'm glad he's not against the idea, but a seminary needs one badly.
The new is only referring.
Yeah.
You cannot.
Mysterious Fungus asks, have you ever heard of another ancient text aside from the Bible that was said to be composed by a documentary hypothesis? No. Nope. This is a theory that's uniquely applied to the Bible. It's one of those. I've used this term before. It's a single purpose theory. It's a single purpose theory. Just like we sometimes have single purpose testing methods. This is a single purpose theory. It doesn't apply to any other text. They don't even apply this to Apocrypha. That's what I find really hysterical. They don't apply this to Apocrypha. They don't apply this to philosophy literature. They don't apply this to other ancient literature. This is just something particular to the Bible. Yeah. Uriel C. In my whole career as a student, I think I took one interdisciplinary class, which was planetary science. Got me to switch from physics to earth science for grad school. Okay, yeah. Darkblade confirmed. God is responsible for giving the world David Falk. I don't know about that, but I think he had something to do with it. Too much crazy stuff in my life to say otherwise. Mama says, that is crazy. No OT department at all. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, just... Darkblade, does being single-purpose imply it to be crap? Often, yes. What we get here is, when you go to single-purpose theories, here's the problem with single-purpose theories, is you want a theory, a good solid theory, should be applicable to a general case as well as a specific case, okay? If it doesn't work in the general case, it implies it won't work very well in the specific case, okay? So, yeah, Uriel C says, single purpose is way too close to ad hoc. Yeah, it is. Yeah. You basically start forming ad hoc theories, tautologies. All this little thing is going to be, and I've always said that a single purpose theory, it's like a single purpose test technique. Okay, and we've talked about these a couple times on this channel. Like the LiDAR that's used to sort of probe underneath the pyramid. It's a single purpose test technique. It doesn't work in a general case. The dating that the shroud guys use, for dating linen, it's a single purpose test technique. It's only used to date the shroud. You can't use it to date linen in general. So if it doesn't work on the broad case, how can we say it's to work in the specific case? So, Dustin Meek says, oh, Dr. Falk, I did buy Reliquary of the Dead, so I'll be sure to leave a review once I finish it. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Those reviews really help. So yeah, it's really the only marketing we have for the book. So, yeah, there's no publisher pushing it. There's no, we're not buying reviews. We're not paying for that stuff. So you guys putting those reviews out there really, really helps, get the message about the book out there. The only other marketing we do is on this channel, and we don't do that much of it. Just on, usually on, we might talk about on shorts or on live streams like this, but that's about all we do for it. So, thank you very much for buying it, and thank you very much when you leave the review. Okay, so I think that covers the seal inscription here. Next super chat here is from Follow It of Ichthys for $5. Thank you for the super chat. Do you think we'll still be able to study the Bible in heaven? Maybe Torah class with Professor Moses? Yeah, why not? Well, I mean, our learning won't cease when we're in heaven.
When we're up there, you have all eternity.
Yeah, here's the thing. My producer says, when you get up to heaven, you'll be able to ask all the questions you want. And I think this is one of the things here's the thing. When you get to heaven, you don't become omniscient. You don't all of a sudden know everything. So when you get up there, you're going to be able to ask all these questions, and that's going to promote there being more questions. And you're going to start getting to probe really, really deep, because all the sort of the clutter and the cloud that confuses the Bible will be swept away. So, yeah, absolutely. I still think you'll be able to study the Bible in heaven. The word is eternal. We know that. The Lord says, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word will be forever. So if God's word is forever, then yeah, you're going to be able to study it forever. Mysterious fungus. I'd be scared to have Moses as my teacher, to be honest. Feels like he'd scream at me. I think his temper will probably be in check by that point. Messianic Talmud, a visual replay of the Gospels would be awesome. Yeah, it would be awesome. Yeah, it would be awesome.
If nothing else, we'd have some serious...
Oh yeah, we'd have some serious reenactments. Yeah, probably. Okay, next super chat here is from a follower of the Ichthys for $10. Thank you for the super chat. How many important archaeological discoveries do you think we've already had for a long time that need to be rediscovered? Like, for example, like the Amorite tablets. Okay, the Amorite tablets is a pretty recent thing. It was one of those set of tablets that was seized during illegal export out of Iraq. Okay, so there's always things that always discoveries that are made from going back to old stuff and re-examining the findings. So I think there's always opportunity for better analysis of existing finds. Okay, so there's always room for that stuff. Always room for that stuff. So absolutely, I think a lot of these finds can be re-examined. Some of them will be reinterpreted in new light. That's the other thing too. Like for example, there might be a find that is dismissed because it doesn't seem important at the time. There's a new interpretation that comes along later, and then you go back to those old finds and you go, oh, well, this sheds new light on this. So absolutely, I think there's a lot of discoveries like that. In the case of certain documents, there's advances in linguistics that changes how things are translated occasionally, or how things are interpreted. Like for example, just like the Israel stela. the so-called Moneptistela, where it talks about, the Israelites. Well, yeah, absolutely, it's Israel, but we now know from the study of, say, the Egyptian language, that the determinatives used for the term Israelite were those used of a wandering people group, like what would you'd expect from nomads or pastoralists. Okay, so when you talk then about the Israelites in the Merneptah, it's not talking about a group that's already established in cities. Okay, now that's not the same interpretation as you would have gotten when that stela was discovered in the late 19th century. But looking at it now, through 100 years of advancements in Egyptology and learning about the language itself, we can see this added nuance to that adds to our understanding of the find. And that's where things are get interesting, as it were. Darkblade says the Mesha Stela was recently reported to potentially name drop David. Yeah, it was. But we already had that too in the Teldan Stela. But this time with the Teldan Stela, they're at this point they're like pretty much sure that it includes David in there. Do you mean House of the Kettle? Oh boy. I still can't believe that guy put that out as a legitimate option. House of the Kettle. That was just so stupid. It was so stupid. House of the Kettle. Yeah. Okay, let's see how are you doing here on super chats. Okay. Okay. Next super chat here is from Subin Paul for, I think it is 100 rupee, I think. At least I think it's rupee. And he asks, what is the majority religious affiliation of biblical scholars in America and Europe? Progressive Christian, atheist, Orthodox Christian, etc. Okay. The vast majority is going to depend on how you do the counting. Okay? On a man per man basis, there are probably more Protestant theologians than anything. Now that can cover a whole huge range, from progressive to atheist to Orthodox Christian, and I use small Orthodox here. Okay, small Orthodox. So when it comes right down to numbers, that's going to be the majority. Okay. Now, with that said, I would say the next highest is going to be secular or atheist. Okay, they're going to be number 2. And that number is shifting. Okay, that number is shifting away from, say, more traditional views of Christianity. Again, some of it is the fact that posts are becoming less and less, academic posts, that is. So without work, less people are taking up biblical scholarship as a field you can actually do work in and get paid for it, as opposed to those who have, say, are doing it for an ideological purpose, and don't ever expect to earn that money back. Gandalf the Based. How are they Protestant if they are atheist? Or did you misspeak? Oh, no, I didn't misspeak. No, you do get Protestants out there that are atheists. Absolutely. Rudolf Bultmann was a member of the a priest in good order of the confessing church of the German Lutheran church. Okay? Man didn't believe in God. Absolutely did not believe in God at all. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Rudolf Bultmann was absolutely an atheist. Or at least so agnostic he might as well have been an atheist. But he was a member of the confessing church in good standing for 60 years. Mysterious Fungus. Marcus Smith is a practicing Roman Catholic. He's a practicing Roman Catholic. I think a lot of people like to quote mine Marcus Smith. He's not as atheistic as many have suggested. In fact, quite the opposite. He has basically come out many times and basically said he's a practicing Roman Catholic. Okay. Dustin Meeks. How can you be a Protestant and be an atheist? Sounds like an oxymoron. It's like you want to be paid for preaching. That's what it is. You're essentially at that point you're basically a guy who's taking the paycheck of a religious organization while privately believing something else. Somebody just mentioned it. Yeah. Yeah, Darkblade. Dial McClellan is a Mormon who at times sounds borderline atheistic to me. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe that stuff. Yeah. Look, Josh Bowen teaches Sunday school. He teaches Sunday school at an Episcopalian church. He's an atheist. He wrote the Atheist Handbook to the Bible. He doesn't believe it, but he teaches at a Sunday school. Oh yeah, people can hold contradictory positions, for convenience, for money. Look, when I was at the University of British Columbia, there was a grad student who was finishing up her PhD who saw no problem about lying about, she was practicing Buddhist, but recognized that all the jobs in teaching the Bible were, at least the majority of them, were in, say, confessional seminaries. She had no problem with lying about being a Christian, even though she was a practicing Buddhist, in order to get work at those places. Mysterious Fungus, but Dan goes full Mormon when he gets on what early Christians believe. Yeah, and he goes full secular too when he talks about what Mormons believe today. So you have to take that with a proverbial grain of salt. Okay, so I would say that's the majority at this point. Are those affiliated with, say, Protestantism? Is still the majority, but that doesn't necessarily equate to what they believe. But at this point, like, the largest organizations are very, very secular. Very secular. Okay, so next super chat here. It's from M. Sharif 124 for $20. Thank you for that generous super chat. Isn't the argument for the consensus dating of Daniel that its prophecies are only accurate up to 1140 which is wrongly predicts that Antiochus IV would die in Jerusalem? What would be your response to this argument? Well, let's look at Daniel 11 here. I think I pretty much know where this is going to go anyway, but we're just going to cover our bases with the text here. Okay. Now, the description here is not specifically of in chapter 11 here is not specifically about Antiochus the Fourth. So that's the first thing we have to note. And it goes into the description about how he'll plundered many lands. At the appointed time he will return, in verse 29, into the south, and for the last time turn the way before. For the ships of Kittim will come against him, therefore he will be disheartened and will return and to become enraged at the Holy Covenant to take action. And the forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation. Okay, now notice here it's that this is the abomination of desolation. This is the performing the unholy sacrifice. Okay, now we get down a little further down in the text here. Then the king will do, verse 36, then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. He will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard to the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. Now, that's not an accurate description of Antiochus IV, but it is the accurate description of someone else. But instead, he will honor a god of fortresses, a god whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. And he will take action against the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him and cause them to rule over many. Okay, so then we get to this text here of 40 to 45. And at the end time, okay, now we're talking about eschaton. The king of the south will collide with him. The king of the north will storm against him, chariots with horsemen with many ships, and he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and most of the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. Well, okay, now this is Antiochus did not conquer Egypt, but he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over the land of precious things of Egypt, and Libyans and Ethiopians will follow on his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. And he will pitch tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help. Okay, so that's the text. Now, what we are talking about here is types and antitypes. Okay? This text is not talking exclusively about Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV is a kind of king of the north, as it or abomination that makes desolate. Okay, he's a kind of this kind of king. Okay, but he's the archetype. He's not the antitype, and this is what we call in textual circles amphibole, where you talk about two kings at the same time, but not necessarily in the same way. Okay? So you can read part of this text and say, oh, well, that applies to Antiochus IV. But you continue to read, and then you start noticing there's some differences and things that cannot possibly apply to Antiochus IV. Like in the end days. He didn't live that long. Okay? Christ tells us that the end days begin with the resurrection, the crucifixion and resurrection. So Antiochus IV is not living in the end days. So here's one of the things. It's trying to narrowly interpret a text in a way it wasn't intended to be interpreted. And this is true about many prophecies. Is that whole recontextualization of the text for particular contexts. Okay? So yeah, it's amphibly, mama. Yep. That I believe that's how it's spelt. Or it's spelt with a Y at the end. I don't remember. But so there's a time here that and there's going to be many of these antichrists that come along, and they're the types. They're the types of antichrist. You have the archetype. That's the archetype is the original parabolic person here, parabolic prophecy, as it were. And that's going to be Antiochus IV. Then you got some types along the way. You're going to get your Neros. You're going to get your Vespasians. You're going to get your Tituses. These Roman emperors. Some of them are going to be of that type of Antichrist. And then you're going to get the antitype. And that's going to be the final fulfillment of this. Okay? What's being mentioned here in Daniel 11:40 to 45 is the antitype. The antitype of the archetype. Okay? So that's how this works. Is Daniel's not just going to talk about just what's happening in current events or even in the near future. He's got bigger sights going on here. Okay, so I hope that helps. So that's how I would respond to this. This is clear. The text is clearly has delineated that you got something going on with Antiochus, but you also got something going on with his antitype as well. And I think that's clear from the text. And so I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I want to thank Jack Ray for gifting the channel 50 Ancient Egypt in the Bible memberships. Thank you so much for your support of the channel. We really, really appreciate it. Robert Laird for $9.99. Hey, it worked. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Jcon45 says, "Hi, Dr. Falk. Hi, Jcon. I recently finished Genesis with the kids at my church. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. They were wondering if Joseph was mummified when he died in Genesis 50, verse 26. Many thanks for all the work you and Mrs. Falk can do." Oh, thank you. And thank you for recognizing the work of my producer as well. She's the unsung hero here, and she doesn't get nearly as enough credit as she deserves. Okay. To answer your question is yes, Joseph was mummified too. Mummification was the standard burial practice of the upper middle classes in Egypt. Okay? We know Jacob was mummified, and we can just assume that Joseph would have been mummified too, since he was in that class of being a vizier. So he would have gotten all the sort of the royal burial, well, not the royal burial, but basically the upper class burials that you would expect of that period. So, thank you very much for that question, and I hope that helped. And it's good to hear that you're teaching kids at your church. I'm so pleased to hear that. We need more of that. Okay, AJ Higgins, composer for $5. Thank you for the super chat. What is the Egyptian context to the cup in Genesis 44:5? Ooh. Okay, I am going to put up a picture. We'll read the text, and we'll put up a picture, and we'll show you exactly what's being talked about here. Because we found one of these cups. Okay, this is. I'll show you this cup in a moment here. So 44, verse 5, and it says, uh, Joseph speaking to his brothers, "Is this not the one from which my Lord drinks, which he indeed uses for divination?" Cup. Here, you have done wrong in doing this. Okay. So let's talk about this cup. And it says it's a cup in verse 2. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph told him. All right, so this is silver cup. This is super expensive. This is a high value item. Okay? Because silver was considered to be, at that time, worth more than gold. Okay? So this is a crazy pricey item. But I'm going to show you an example of this, and let me see if hopefully I can find this quickly, as I got a picture of this. Just take me a moment to hopefully pull it up. Okay, so it's probably going to take a little time to get the squirrels running here. A long time to get the squirrels running. Okay, so just bear with me for a moment, and I'll show you an example of one of these cups. Someday I'll show you an example of one of these cups. Okay, wow. Slow. All right. Let's see if I can find the filter here. Okay, I need 2019, I think it was. All right, not, that's the one. Okay. Hopefully I will find it in just a second here, and then I'll show you one of these cups. And it's taking its sweet time. But it'll be worth it. It'll be worth it. Because I'll show you an actual divination cup. Because it's really cool. Yes. There it is. Okay. Sport. get this up. And you will have... Oh, come on. Right, untitled export, that's correct. Right. No, not that one. Why is it doing that? All right, here we go. All right. What? Wait for it. Wait for it. This will be worth it. And go and this is a real divination cup. Tomb of King Tut. Real McCoy. All right, there we go. There it is. Okay. That is and it is actually quite large. I'd say it's about 11, 12 inches across. It's big. It's bigger than you would expect. It's made of alabaster. And yeah, that's the real McCoy. That's a real divination cup. Yeah.
Yes, I think it
Was it worth the wait? I hope so. Yeah, it's, and what they would do is they would pour either water or wine into this cup. They would peer into the cup, and then they would see the images of what they're supposed to see. Okay? So it is kind of like a crystal ball in that respect. But that is a genuine divination cup. And it is found, as I said, this one was found in the tomb of King Tut. It was actually found in the passageway. So, but this is the context. People would use these cups in Egypt to do the divining, to consult the gods. So absolutely, this was a thing. They did it. The one described in Genesis, Joseph's divination cup, was silver. Okay, so this is not a...
no idea.
Why would it be in the passageway? Because it was taken by robbers, looters, and just dropped. There was some looting done of King Tut's tomb very early on. And this was one of the items that had been dropped. Now, we don't know exactly what they stole, because so much was in that tomb. But this was one of the items that they had taken, and they had dropped in the passageway. So, BC didn't run wife find Joseph's actual cup? Could be. Boy. Oh boy. So there it is, a real divination cup from ancient Egypt. Hope you found that interesting. Okay, that was fun. Next super chat here is from followers of the Shepherd here for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on Inana and Jesus parallels? I think it's these sort of parallels when they're applied to Jesus are kind of dumb. I think they're dumb. I mean, there are biblical parallels to the life of Jesus, no doubt. But Inanna, I mean, the whole idea of the dead God rising again, yeah, I'm not quite buying it. It's too far. There's no propinquity here. That's probably the issue I have with this. Is if you're going to make these sort of parallels, and often these parallels are sort of made with the inference that there's copying happening, that there's plagiarism. You usually need some sort of propinquity. So there has to be actually a geographical or a temporal connection. And there just isn't any temporal or geographical connection between Inanna and Jesus. So there needs to be more propinquity. As BC says, needs more propinquity. Yeah, absolutely. No propinquity, no connection. Oh yeah. In the case of Inanna, you're talking agricultural cycle, as my producer just stated. You know, she said, you know, this idea of gods dying and rebuilding. You know, that whole agricultural cycle that you find over and over and over again. And Jesus is not recapitulating the agricultural cycle, not at all. You know, so no, he's defeating death and sin once for all. That's a whole different kettle of fish than what you find Inanna doing. So yeah, I'm not buying it. No, just not buying it. And it's not that I'm opposed to there being parallels with Jesus. I think there could be. I think that's possible. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of counterfeits. There's a lot of reasons why parallels exist. You know, there's not just one kind of parallel. You know, it's not just they plagiarized it. No, that's a stupid, oversimplistic way of looking at it. AJ Higgins says, would the first century Galilean even know who Inanna is? No, they wouldn't.
Point.
Yeah, Jonathan Walker, and he resurrected in the land of the living. Yeah, though that's a problem with a lot of these. Is these sort of parallels? You know, have people resurrecting into the realm of the dead. Like what? I mean,
that's just reaching your destination, not resurrecting.
I mean, this is one of the things when I hear people talk about the supposed parallels between Osiris and Jesus. They always point to he's resurrecting. Yeah, Osiris is resurrected as god of the dead in the underworld. Not the land of the living. Ever. Okay? Mama says here. Let's get this up here. Instead of being dead, he was alive. Yeah. Yeah. Jonathan Walker. Oops. Afterlife is still being alive, but not among the living. Yep. Justified Janice. Did I hear that right? Laugh out loud. Oh, it gets crazier. It gets even crazier than that. But this is a PG-13 show. We won't go over the whole Weekend at Bernie's thing. Okay. And that just gets nuts. If you've watched Weekend at Bernie's, you understand the whole Osiris myth in a nutshell. That's all we're going to say about it.
Moving.
Moving on. Moving on here. Okay. I want to thank Matthew Harrell for that 99-cent super chat, that super sticker. Really appreciate your support of the channel. Thank you so very much for keeping us going. We really appreciate it. I think next super chat here is a member question here from Mama. And she goes, found it. 1 John 3:11-12. It was evil versus righteous regarding Cain versus Abel. Absolutely. Now let's look at that, just that passage here, just for completeness here. John chapter 3, 11-12. For this is the message we have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who is the evil one, and slew his brother. And for what reason did he slay him? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. There you have it. Yeah. And that's all the interpretation you need of the Cain and Abel story. Okay? Anything else, I think, goes beyond the biblical text here and goes into the area of eisegesis. All right? So thank you for that comment. Really appreciate it. Okay, Gandalf the Base for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Ooh, Mama says, kid you not, my Bible opened right up to that page because it was right where I had been last been reading. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence. Okay, Gandalf the Base says, so I was at my first Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting last week as a pastor. Well, interesting. That was interesting to say the least. Well, I thought that was interesting all on its own. Do you have an experience with Baptists? We seem so fun. Yeah, I have actually had some experience with Baptists, and I agree, they can be very fun. Of course, they also can be very restrictive, too. A lot of them don't like the drinking, dancing, and gambling, okay? I'm not a gambler, but, you know. They can sometimes be a bit legalistic, as I said, particularly regarding the consumption of alcohol and dancing. But some of them also don't like dragon dice. I can't understand why. I mean, dragon dice are cool. Oh, wait, look at what I got here. I got some dragon dice. Ah. That looks like a Thuman. Yep, got that one. And where's my Urim? I have an Urim here somewhere. Urim here. Now it decides to elude me. Where's my Urim? No, I got an Urim in here. Got it? There's my Urim. See? There's my Urim. And I've got second Thuman in here too somewhere. There we go. My Urim and Thuman. My dragon dice. Oop. Which I'm going to drop in my coffee if I'm not careful. Okay. Mama says, I don't drink, dance, or chew, or go with girls who do. That used to be a real thing, yeah. Yeah. Tony G. Urim and Thummim? Yeah. Yeah, we did a recreation of the Urim and Thummim. Did a whole video on this. So yeah, BC, you had Thummim. Yes, we did. We did a whole video on this whole recreation of these, and they're fascinating. They're essentially 20-sided dice that have letters from the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. Yeah, absolutely. And they were a lot of fun. And occasionally we trot these things out during We did look at the idea of getting these professionally made. We have it looked like it was going to be really, really too expensive to get them custom made. I did talk to some dice manufacturers, who's who said, who we showed these to and said, hey, what would it take to get them custom made, and it was like something like $10-15 a set. We also looked at the idea of actually making them ourselves. Although it would require some things such as a compression pot to do that. So it would be take a bit to actually get them done. All right. Mama, that saying references to chewing tobacco. It's an old saying. There are some people who still do that stuff. Darkblade, maybe 3D printing. There is some issues even with a 3D print job on this. I could possibly, but even then, for us, that would necessitate us sort of getting a 3D printing setup that's fine enough, that has the resolution to be able to do this. So I am not sure if we could do that. Tony G, if it comes with the breastplate. Oh, no, that would be pricey. We did the breastplate? Oh, yeah, that'd be pricey. We're not going to recreate the breastplate just because of the cost. But that reminds me, we are still going to be doing a book review eventually on this book. Okay? I have gotten... my computer melted down last week, so I'm way behind on a lot of things. But because my computer melted down, it gave me the time to actually go reading through this, it's actually a pretty good book, but it also will discuss a lot regarding the breastplate. So, okay. Mama, you could cosplay create it. Yeah, could do that. Could do that. Jonathan Walker, UV resin 3D printer would probably have finer details than a traditional plastic 3D printer. Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. Jack Ray, do you have a UPS to deal with power fluctuations? I used to, but then the battery gave out on it. And the battery is really expensive to replace. I don't have... I don't find that I generally need a UPS at the moment for these things. Gandalf the Base, do you need a new computer? What's going on with it? I like to ask you have... I ask like you have no experience in computers. It was a software issue. It was a software issue. Essentially what we had to do was just reinstall the operating system, because it got trashed pretty good. So yeah, so but it didn't mean I was down for a day. And it was like the night before we actually had to get the video out. So it happened on like a Sunday. So I was fixing the computer all Sunday, and then had to edit the video all Sunday night for Monday morning. Okay. So anyway, yeah, I've had some interactions with Southern Baptists. I've never been a Southern Baptist myself. They do see fun, at least when they're not being legalistic. All right, so there's my thoughts on Southern Baptists. Jack Ray for $2. Thank you for the super chat. Will we get more member emojis? Ooh, I have to see how many we got left in reserve. Let's just make a note of that. What kind of member emojis would you like? I think I would at least have two. Let's see. Emojis. Let me just double check how many. Plug Patreon. Yeah, Patreons help pay for tech. Yeah, exactly. That's our tech budget, is Patreon. Could we trade out some old ones? We maybe. Let me see what we got here. See how many I have to go look into my settings here, my community settings. This will just take a moment. Channel. Advanced features. Wait, it's not here. It's not in this part. It is. It's elsewhere. Settings community. Is it in community? Viewer posts. Customization. Nope. It would actually I know where it would be in memberships. Okay. How many do I get here? Okay. Just emojis. We will look into how many we get here. I can okay. There's a certain unlock feature here. As you gain more members, you can upload more emojis. 20 million emojis are currently is that unlocked or just loud? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, there's a certain unlock limit to these. I think we haven't used them all by any stretch, but leave the recommendations of what kind of emojis you'd like, and we'll see what we can do to add to them. Okay, so hope that helps. Okay. All right, so the next one here, the next super chat. But yeah, we are limited to member emojis by the number of members, so we'll see what we can do for that. We'll get you more information on it by next week. We need a spirit critter emoji. Well, I wonder what kind of spirit critter we can do for that. We could do a real angel, yeah, real cherubims. Okay. Mama says, we are alternating Friday nights during the summer. 1 week it's daddy movie night with their dad. The other week it's Dr. Falk as a family. Well, thank you. Feel honored that we rate so high. Okay. AJ Higgins puts in a $3 super chat here. He says, your chronology of writing of the Pentateuch. My chronology is that most of the documents, source documents, were written during the wandering in the Sinai. I would place Exodus first, then Numbers, then I would probably put Genesis, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy at the sort of the end of the wandering period. Okay, and I would then say that once they get into the Holy Land, into Canaan, Joshua then, or one of his scribes, then paste those documents into 5 books for the sake of with connecting text for continuity. Okay, so that's how I would put the chronology of the writing of the Pentateuch. So hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It's essentially a kind of supplementary hypothesis. Okay, AJ Higgins for $5. Thank you for the super chat. Are there correspondent names to other kings in Genesis 14 like Amraphel? Yes, there is one. We'll pull that up here. Genesis. Genesis 14, verse 1. And it came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, that they made war against. And okay, now the one that's also attested is Kedorlaomer, king of Elam. Now the problem with this name is it's attested too often. There are three possibilities within the reign of King Hammurabi for Kedorlaomer. Okay? So, it's one of those things where we've got too many possibilities. There are three names that of Elamite kings that could be this king. So it's just sort of landing that in the right spot, as it were. Okay. All right. Darkblade asks, follow-up question: why do law scholars reject this Amraphel Hammurabi ID? Okay, three reasons. Actually, two reasons. Okay. Basically, liberal scholars are going to reject this because it would sort of imply the historicity of the Bible here. Okay. So basically, secular scholars don't want to recognize that there's some sort of attached, correspondence here to it. Some of them will use a weak linguistic argument, but those arguments are easily, overcome. Okay, but it's essentially they don't want to recognize that there's a historical link. Okay, so that's why the secular scholars will reject. Now, conservative scholars, particularly fundamentalist scholars, will reject it for a different reason, which is that Hammurabi is too late for early dating of Abraham. So this would peg Abraham in the 18th century, not the 20th century. So it would basically sort of throw out the whole possibility that Abraham was early Middle Kingdom and Joseph was 12th dynasty. Okay, so highly conservative scholars like, say, Douglas Petrovich would reject this scholar. So you're going to get both sides: the conservatives, the deeply fundamentalist conservatives, and the liberal secularists rejecting this for different reasons. They're not rejecting this for the same reason. They're rejecting it for different reasons. Darkblade. So it basically comes down to Abraham mythicism and Abraham super ancientism. Is that right? Yeah, that's pretty much right. Yeah, so that's what it basically comes down to. And that's more or less the reasoning here. Is there's a preconceived notion that Abraham is a myth, therefore any connection cannot be factual. On the other hand, as you said, the ancientism sector here wants to see Abraham as super old, because they're taking a certain kind of dating presupposition here when it comes to Abraham and Joseph, and as a result to the Exodus. So that's what's sort of going on here. I hope that helped. So that's why there's that particular rejection of the ID. It's not really over. It's not really a linguistic argument. Sometimes they'll couch it in that, but it's not really over that. Okay. AJ Higgins, why are the vowels different in Hammurabi and Amraphel? Okay. I think I'm good for water. Okay, the reason why is Hammurabi is the Mesopotamian version of Amurapi. Okay? Here's what's going on linguistically as far as this goes. The glottal consonant at the beginning converts to an Akkadian round H. Okay, so that explains that part. Okay, the meme and the resh are the same in both. The P and the B are basically can be either. You know, Akkadian will convert that Semitic P to a B or a P. Okay, so that just leaves only one thing that's actually under contest here, and that's the L. Okay, the vowels really aren't a big deal here because we're dealing with Semitic languages, and vowel shifts happen all the time in Semitic languages. It's really what we have to deal with here is the consonants. So, Hammurabi is recognized as an Amorite name. Okay, he represents that first dynasty. It's an Amorite dynasty. It's an Amorite name, so it's no surprise that Hammurabi comes from Amurapi. Okay, and Amurapi is almost the same as Amraphel. Okay, or Amraphel. Okay, now the last L at the end of Amraphel. The reason is because Hebrew abhors a final vowel. It abhors final vowels. And the reason it abhors final vowels is because it uses, when it does say pronouns, those tend to have heavy vowel sounds at the end of words. Okay? So, yeah, it could be Amurapi Ilu too. That's a possibility, but it's not even necessary. Okay, even this argument here it's possible, but it's not necessary. All you need to do, like we see this happening so often in Hebrew that you don't even have to go there. Just that whole abhorrence of that final vowel thing is going to make it one of those things where where it's just one of those things where you don't even need to justify it in this way. So, that's at that point the linguistic argument ends, really. Once you're at that point, once you've arrived there, you're sort of more or less done. Okay. Yeah, Merv Monson says Hammurabi was an Amorite, though not an Elamite. No, yeah, he was, but Kedar was an Elamite. So, depends on which one you're talking about here. Merv Monson or Shinar is possibly Mesopotamian, not Elam. Yeah, Shinar's not Elam. No, Shinar's not Elam. It is in Mesopotamia. It is probably the region around Babylon. AJ Higgins, do you think we'll see Bibles with Urkesh or Hammurabi in our lifetimes? Nope. We will not see that in our lifetime. Gandalf the Base. Wait, I just got confused. Are you saying Abraham doesn't date to Hammurabi? No, I'm saying Abraham does date to Hammurabi. He says, I thought Hammurabi was a pretty solid dating for Abraham. I think it is, but there's a lot of scholars who do disagree with this. Jonathan Walker, only in our personal Bibles. Hey, look, I'd love it if if Bible started translating Yom Suf as Sea of Reeds. Okay, I'll take that one right there. I'm not gonna get greedy about this. Uh, just
Especially since some of these.
oh, I know some of these translations are so well documented, but it just resists getting into the Bible, getting into our Bible translations, and it really comes down to that people make a fuss when you start changing the translations.
So much. The
Look,
red.
they will never, you will never see, at least in any big name mainstream Bible, um Yom Suf being translated as Sea of Reeds. You'll never see Keperet or Mercy Seat translated as a lid. You'll
But that's so unexciting.
It is so
It's a
unexciting.
lid. No, it's a mercy seat is
You'll never see, like Psalm 130 says, that Pharaoh, the armies of Pharaoh were shaken off. It's just like, oh, come on, guys. Jonathan Walker, my NIV has a footnote as Sea of Reeds. Yeah, you'll see it in footnotes. You'll see it in footnotes, and it might appear in a footnote at some point, but you won't see it in translation. Traditional renderings are really tenacious. Okay, they're really tenacious, and the reason why is because translation committees get hate mail over this. But here's what happens. There's going to be an address at the beginning of most of your Bibles as to who to contact for licensing rights, and people get the idea, oh, I hate this translation, so I'm going to write this address, which really is only interested in licensing rights, and complain about this Bible, how it's being so liberal and anti-biblical. And then, well, look, I mean, I get grief when I talk about the Sea of Reeds being the proper translation of Yom Suf. That's not a controversial thing to say, but people go absolutely spare when they say that. Yeah, Ganel the Base, I don't know how you don't date him to Hammurabi. I figured that out when I studied his code in college in my criminal justice class. Yeah, absolutely. All the connections were there. His code is so unique for the time. Yeah. Jack Ray, spare? Yeah, that's a British way of saying crazy. They lose it. They lose it. Oh boy. Yeah, I do use a lot of British slang. I was there for 3 years, so it's like, okay. In Liverpool, no less. Oh boy. AJ Higgins, so you're saying the conservative position actually needs to be conservative and not liberal with our conventional interpretations? That's one way of saying it, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that applying that to interpretations or translations is beneficial. Okay? Is it textual? Is it contextual? Is it historical? I think those are the categories we should be talking about when we talk about translations. We shouldn't be talking about things such as what best fits our presuppositions, whether that's a traditional or liberal interpretation. I think when we start doing this is one of the things that sort of drives me nuts sometimes about guys like Heiser. Okay. Um, I love Heiser. Okay, I love Heiser. I love a lot of work he does. Sorry. Um, But he also had this tendency of doing an interpretation of an interpretation and then claiming that's the best translation. That's not a translation. Okay? That's not a translation. That's a compound interpretation. And when you have a compound interpretation, that can never be a translation. You're not translating the text as it reads. You're taking the nuance of the nuance and coming up with something like for example, his translation of Nakash, the serpent in the garden, was essentially, well, Nakash can mean bronze. Okay, fair enough. Well, and nuance of that is it's shiny. So Nakash can mean shiny one. Wait a minute. I just saw how you got there. That's that's an interpretation of an interpretation. Uh, no. No, that's not a translation. It's not a translation. Jack Ray. Kaiser's had a hammer and saw a lot of nails. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he sort of did. Many of the problems he was dealing with were nails. Okay, yeah, we can definitely grant him that. But at the same time, too, there were just some. Here's the thing. He was a very creative scholar. I will grant him that. One of the problems with creative is that it was not always tempered with good sense. And a lot of scholars that are really, really creative are like this. You do see this a lot in some. You've got two kinds of scholars. Yeah, there's more than this, but okay. But they generally fall into those that are either really rigorous or really creative. You don't see a lot of scholars that are both creative and rigorous. They either go crazy on the rigor and never have a creative original thought in their life, or they go crazy on the creative and never check to see if any of that creativity is actually real. Okay? There was a scholar in Egyptology who was like really bad for this. His name was Hans Gutteke. Hans Gutteke was incredibly creative. Oh my gosh, he came up with some fabulously creative stuff. It was not very rigorous. Dark Blade. Where in the spectrum did Kitchen fall? He fell more on the rigor side. He was all about rigor. Okay? And most of the Liverpool trained guys were about rigor. Okay? Oh, that's one of the things about going through Liverpool is you are not trained to be necessarily creative. Although I was very lucky. My Dr. Votter, Mark Collier, was more on the spectrum of creativity. He was closer to a good compromise there. Collier was sort of a good balance between the creative and the rigorous. I mean, he's an exceptionally rigorous scholar, but he was sort of more, he leaned slightly more on that creative spectrum than, say, Kitchen would. So, yeah.
Than when people are.
Yeah, you do get better results when you start off with rigorous scholarship and then add creativity to it rather than try to rein in creativity with rigor. It just seems to work better if you start off rigorous. So, Gandalf the Base, it's almost like you need the rigorous scholars to work with creative ones to correct each other and balance each other out. It's more like this. You need the rigorous scholars to correct, but creative ones are going to be doing the advancements. Okay? It was Albert Einstein who said, I think it was, I'm going to butcher this quote, but he said something along the lines of creativity is superior to intellect. So the greatest advancements that we get in scholarship come out of creativity that's been fully tempered by rigor. Those are your best advancements. And it's always been the case in every field. And there are times when the pendulum swings on this too, where you get times when creativity is more esteemed than rigor, and the vice versa. Right now, we're in that sort of swing of the pendulum where it's more on rigor than it is on creativity, but you are getting some goofy stuff because of some unbridled creativity as well. Yeah. Jonathan Walker, if one was to make Hebrew manuscripts with modern scholarship like Ur-Keshdim to Urkesh of Aram, Amarfal to Amarabi, would writing the vowels be the hardest part besides the spelling? Well, the vowels are one of those things where we'd have to be very circumspect about it because they're not part of the original manuscript. Okay, they're not part of. We have to be careful about vowels because vowels were never part of the inspired text. One thing we have to be really super careful of. Our knowledge of the vowels comes from the Masoretes. Okay? They come to, it comes down to the Masoretes of the 10th century, 8th to 10th century AD, who put the vowels into the text through the Masoretic pointings. They're basing that on their traditions. Okay? God bless the Masoretes, but it's also not inspired. And there are points in the Masoretic text where they make some kind of do some goofy things with the vowels. And I can think of one just off the top of my head, which is the land of Ramses in Genesis 45, where for some strange reason the Masoretes add 2 Potok vowels to the first syllable in Ramses. Why do they do this? Nobody knows. It's not the same, and in the rest of the transliterations of Ramses, it's pretty normal. But for some reason, they have this really weird vocalization of that first Ramses, and nobody knows why. Nobody knows why they did this. Okay, so we have to be careful about a couple things too. The other thing they added that we need to be careful of too is spaces. The Masoretes were the guys who added the spaces to the Hebrew text. Sometimes they got that wrong. Okay? And Paul Lawrence, in his book Egg Whites or Turnips, does an excellent job of pointing out some of these places where the Masoretes put the space in the wrong place. So you have to be a little careful about what the Masoretes are doing, because they don't always get it right, especially when it comes to vowels and spaces. Jonathan Walker says, well, I mentioned the vowels so they could be close to other Semitic languages. Yeah, and overall they did a pretty good job. Okay? Yeah. Akkadian's worse. Yeah, Akkadian's worse than Egyptian on this one. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And break all those up and then work with them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, the determining where the word separations are in Egyptian is a problem for beginners in the language, but Yeah, it's a lot easier in Egyptian than it is in Akkadian.
Most can read English.
Yeah. Uh so AJ Higgins asks, where would you fall on the rigor or creativity? I'm actually a little on the creative side. Okay. I believe in I'm probably on that across that precipice into the creativity side, but I also believe strongly in good rigor because I've seen what happens when you don't temper your world, your creativity with rigor. It can lead you all sorts of strange places. Okay, so Jonathan Walker goes, just in case we lose the manuscripts we have today, we could make better ones with the things we know today. Um, well, if you lose the manuscripts that we have today, you'd probably have some problems.
But this is also
But you could also make some um better decisions on essentially what you can how you parse some of that. Again, I think in many respects, Masoretes did a really, really good job, but it's not perfect and it's not inspired. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Let's see it. I want to thank Bill Haverneck for $1.99 super chat. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Really appreciate it. And he asks a question for another $1.99 super chat. Why didn't the Egyptians do better preserving papyrus? The papyrus that was preserved resulted from the essentially there being a desert nation. Okay. Uh, they didn't go out of their way to preserve papyrus. Papyrus was just preserved by the desert climate. So almost all the papyrus we have is from Upper Egypt. Very little of papyrus survives from Lower Egypt. In fact, texts in general have not survived the climate of Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt has a high water table that's also high in salt. This destroys both papyrus and stone. Yeah, that's the real kicker is that water table will destroy stone just as easily as it destroys papyrus. So yeah, I agree with you, Jonathan Walker. If only Avaris was dry. Oh yeah, if Avaris was dry, we'd have so many texts. We'd have so many texts if Avaris was dry. But it's not. It's Mercy. It sucks for preservation. They found 300 bullae. These are clay seals at the scriptorium at Avaris. So they found the scriptorium. It destroyed just about everything. They found 300. I think it's something like 314 seals and two fragments of clay cuneiform tablets. Not enough to read. We only know from these tablets that they date to the first dynasty of Babylon. We believe it's around the fourth ruler of the Babylonian first dynasty. But yeah, oh, Jonathan Walker, like to buy a J for Joseph, please. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have almost. We've lost almost all of that writing, all of it. So really pretty sad. But there's only about 24 texts from all periods of time that come from the Delta. That's how we got tens of thousands of texts from Upper Egypt and 24 for Lower Egypt. That shows you how bad the relative preservation conditions are. So, hope that helped. It's sad, but there it is. All right, next super chat here is from Paul for 1999. Thank you very much for the super chat. He goes, I know we talked about Egyptian beer and wine in the past. Did the Egyptians have any hard liquor? No, they didn't. When they got drunk off of wine. That's as hard as it got. So thinking 12, 13%-ish is probably what we're talking about here. So yeah. That's what they if an Egyptian wanted to get drunk, he'd get drunk off of wine. Red wine. But that was the extent of their liquor. Now, if they really wanted to get hammered, they would combine that wine with lotus juice or the petals of the lotus plant. And that took them into a whole different psychedelic experience. Okay? That's when they really want to get hammered. So, hope that helps. Thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Jonathan Walker, we might still have hope for the Hyksos tombs. Yes, if we can find them. Okay? We haven't been able to find them yet. If we find some Hyksos tombs, that would be royal tombs, Hyksos royal tombs. That would be fantastic. But no one's found them yet. So, yeah, we don't have... yeah, we haven't found any of the Hyksos royal tombs so far. But the hope springs eternal here. Okay, and looks like the last super chat here is from BC, who asks a member question here. Dr. Kip seems to be struggling to think of any time other scholars have disagreed with him and he's been wrong. Can you help him out with examples? Well, he was wrong about Jericho. That's for sure. You know, he made a video saying that there was no late Bronze Age Jericho. He was wrong. He was wrong when he said that there were casemate walls in the early Bronze Age in Jericho. Very much wrong. He was wrong when he said that the Amuru were the Amorites. He was wrong there too. Oh, this is fun. Okay, so yeah, that's just the dude is outside of his wheelhouse, doesn't know what he's talking about, and you know, he just it's all about hedge protection for him, all about hedge protection. Jonathan Walker. By Nigro's same paper he cited, but I still could stand by my previous comment. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, you know, it's like, you know, even some of the scholars he's gotten on there, you know, like Mark Lucher, Maggie Bryson have all admitted I'm right. So it's just like, okay. So it's like, dude, when you get your own scholars on there and they disagree with you, maybe it's time you should rethink your position. Just saying. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Real scholars are going to go with the evidence regardless of your position, and you know, yeah. I mean that whole casemate thing in the early Bronze Age, that was funny. That was funny. The Amuru. Well, that's not Amorites. Amuru means Amorites. Good times. Good times. Okay, let's finish off with some non-super chats, and then we'll call it a night. Don't have a lot. Oh boy. Yeah, we didn't have as many super chats tonight as we regularly do, so we got through these a lot faster.
And
okay, 10:18. All right, see it here. Solidus asked the question: do you think the Garden of Eden was in southern Iraq? I think so. There are there's a lot of like the four rivers, we know two of them already. We do know we definitely know where the Euphrates is. We know where the Tigris is. The Pishon and the Gihon. Pishon, we understand roughly where it is now. It probably is in that area of what they call sometimes, I believe it's called Oceania, where the Mesopotamian Valley, the coastline actually has come inland a lot. It's actually one of those few river deltas where the coastline actually moves in instead of going out to sea. And that's a peculiarity of the geography of the area. So it could be very likely be that Sealand. That's what it was called, was Sealand, not Oceania. Sealand. So it's likely that Sealand was in that area, in that floodplain / delta in southern Iraq that's been sort of eaten up by the encroaching coastline. So I don't know exactly where Garden of Eden would be, but that would be probably a good guess, is it's in that area of Sealand that no longer exists today. Okay, so I hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate it. Ah, 1144. All right. AJ Higgins. What does Ken Ham get right? Okay, I think Ken Ham gets some things right. Okay, he doesn't get everything wrong. It's hard to get everything wrong. Let me put it this way: it's as hard to be 100% wrong as it is to be 100% right. Now, that's not to say that you can't be a lot right or a lot wrong, but it's really, really difficult to be 100% wrong. As they say, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Okay. There's things that I think he does get right. You know, Genesis is important. Okay, yeah, sure, I can believe that. He believes in the inspiration of Scripture. Okay, believe that too. I think that's absolutely correct. It's unless it's a digital clock. Okay.
It would still show the number.
Yeah, if it was blinking all zeros, it'd still be right twice a day. Even if it was a digital clock. Okay. Ham gets right that's a good portion of the Bible contains historical information. He's right about that. Now, is he right about everything is historical? No. No, he's not. But some of it is. Absolutely. So, he does get some things right. I am seeing, however, a sea change in answers in Genesis. And I think this is one of the things I think that I think is important that about, say, answers in Genesis. I think they have been striving to do better. Okay. In fact, I would say this about them versus say Creation Ministries International. Creation Ministries International is not striving to do better. Okay? They're not striving to be more rigorous. I do see at least an attempt made by Answers in Genesis to be more rigorous about some of its more serious work. Now, Gandalf the base, they no longer push the canopy narrative, it seems. Yeah, and I think that was interesting because, they actually had reason to do this. Okay? There was a time when the canopy narrative was pushed by, say, evolutionists. You can actually find this on the Walking with Dinosaurs documentary. The Walking with Dinosaurs documentary talks about how Antarctica was kept warm by a canopy of water vapor over the Earth. Now, I understand that today, scientists have abandoned that, but in its time, at least Answers in Genesis had warrant for that view. Okay, so I don't sort of get down on them for the canopy narrative. So I think that's, again, that's one thing that they had warrant at the time for this, but as science moved on, they've also moved on. And that's what I think is kind of important about, say, Answers in Genesis 2, is they will sometimes think twice about what they say and then sort of move on from it, quietly letting it drop. Like, let's face it, scientists do the same thing. They don't sort of dig up the past. They sort of just drop what they used to believe and move on. So, Darkblade, from what I've seen, Creation Ministries International is better in Egyptian chronology matters. Answers in Genesis literally hosts articles by David Down. Yes, See My Eye also does the same thing, though. I've seen them actually have host Down. So, yeah, David Down made the rounds across a lot of creationist groups. Still does. His materials can be found in just about any creationist society. So, Egyptian chronology is going to be a sore point with creationist groups. Merv Monson says, I remember a guy on AIG who dated the Exodus to 2000 BC. That would be Gerald Aardsma. And Aardsma has been pretty much vilified in even creationist circles. They don't even believe his stuff anymore, because he took it even further back than 2000 BC. Okay? So, yeah, that's the guy who tried to date the Exodus based upon radioactive volcanic ash. And, it sounded very scientific. It wasn't, but it sounded very scientific. By the way, his Aardsma's relatives actually live close to me. So, little detail there. Jonathan Walker, scientists will mention past periods, give reasons why they believed it, then give reasons why they abandoned it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Like, for example, they normally won't comment on things like, Haeckel's embryology stuff. They won't generally comment on, say, the moth thing in England. There's various things that they won't comment on just because it just doesn't look good, and that's fine. I wouldn't expect, I would expect sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander here. So if we don't dig up their past, they shouldn't be digging up creationist past. But that said, they should properly represent creationists and evolutionists as they exist today. Darkblade, in a recent article written by Tony Lacey on the Merneptah Stela, Answers in Genesis raised the idea, though didn't outright affirm, that Merneptah was Shishak. Yeah, Troy Lacey's is a loon. They still have problems with this rigor thing. I know they've been trying to be more rigorous, but they just do let certain individuals slip in there, especially their staff writers. Okay? And Troy Lacey has been an Answers in Genesis staff writer in the past. So, there are some issues with the fact that they do give their staff writers a certain amount of leash where they can avoid peer review. And I think that's still a problematic. There's still some problematic aspects of Answers in Genesis. So I'm not going to give them a free pass, not by a long shot. But at least they've made a baby step towards better rigor. CMI never has. CMI has always used creationist peer reviewers for their peer reviews. Answers in Genesis doesn't always use creationist peer reviewers. Sometimes they actually use scholars, surprisingly. So yeah, if it's a staff writer, they're going to give them a longer leash than, say, if it's somebody who's writing from the outside. Okay, anything else? Hmm? Why we don't see the drop-down windows? Okay. 829, all right. All right. This will probably be the last non-super chat of the night. Eight 29. Actually, we'll take this one instead, because I think this is actually a better question. Mysterious Fungus at 932 asks, Job takes place outside of Israel, correct? Yes, that is correct. It takes place in the country of Aram. Okay, now this is the area of at the time of Job, it would have been the fractured states of the defunct Mitanni Empire. Okay, so the Mitanni Empire, gets threatened by the Assyrians. It becomes a vassal state of the Hittites. The Hittites fall apart, and Mitanni breaks apart into various little tiny isolated kingdoms called the Aramean states. Eventually, those Aramean states will come together and form the Kingdom of Aram. Okay, and what happens here is that during the time of Job is sometime between the fall of Mitanni and the coalescing of the Kingdom of Aram. Okay, so yes, Job takes place in Syria. This is essentially the area of Syria. So it's outside of Israel proper. It's in this Aramean um, Wild West. It becomes very Wild West when the Mitanni Empire falls apart. Law and order breaks down. You get raiders. You get roving Chaldeans. Just doing their thing. It's not a great place to live, but that's what's sort of the cultural milieu. You're definitely in the Iron Age, probably Iron Age 2, and at that point, it's sort of a law and order, sort of a not a law and order, outlaw. It's an outlaw sort of environment as you get these sojourners, like Job, you know, taking their flocks around the land, and encountering just a land without government. So anyway, I think that's gonna wrap it up for tonight. Um, hmm? Well, west of Ishmael. Yeah, it is sort of, isn't it? Um, Jonathan Walker. Yeah, we see you click the tab to see your mouse move, but the drop-down list of book titles, chapter verses don't show up. I don't know, do they? Yeah, it does show up sometimes. I just don't use that tab all that often. Okay, so yeah, if you use a different tab, I think here it still shows up. What you talking about? Okay, so anyway, we're gonna end it here. We want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you for your super chats because you keep food on the table. We really, really appreciate that. If you donated through PayPal, we want to thank you for that as well. We appreciate those who support us for the work we're doing. We also want to say thank you to our Patreon supporters who essentially fund our equipment repair budget, which we seem to be drawing from at an alarming rate because all our equipment is old. So we really want to thank our Patreon and our YouTube membership supporters because you guys keep the lights on and the equipment running. We also want to thank our regular subscribers who watch our videos, hit that like and subscribe button, and recommend the URLs of our videos to other social media platforms. You guys get the message out there. As that said, thank you very much for watching and joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.